Hey guys, if you were born a common soul in the dusty streets of colonial Latin America, let's say in a sun-baked village where adobe walls sigh under the weight of the midday heat, you probably wouldn't survive the afternoon without a mandated siesta. You arrive into the world not with a loud cry and sterile hospital lights, but rather with the rustling of palm fronds and the faint ringing of the church bell, marking la hora sexta, the 6th hour past sunrise, and the law says it's time to rest. Your parents are peasants, or maybe candle makers, or maybe they run a tiny tamale stall that's part legal, part tolerated, and part blessed by the local priest who gets a free breakfast every Sunday. When you're born, you're about the size of a loaf of pan de yuca, and about as noisy. The midwife, sanctioned by local ordinance to serve within a specific barrio, wraps you in rough cotton and fans you with a palm frond to keep the flies away. No one is in a hurry. They are not allowed to be. The law says laborers must stop by noon, not just because it's hot, but because everyone gets cranky. And that, as far as colonial governance is concerned, is a public safety risk. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first days are slow, not just because you're an infant, but because everything around you moves like molasses on a cool tile. By law, siesta stretches from the 6th to the 9th hour, so from about noon to 3 p.m. During this time, no construction is allowed. No shouting of sales in the street markets, no mule trains clopping down the cobblestone alleys, and absolutely no noisy celebrations of any kind, unless it's a saint's day, which, luckily for everyone who likes fireworks and ignoring rules, is at least 3 times a week. You grow up under the rhythm of this peculiar law, which is both widely known and selectively obeyed. In theory, every person in town must stop work at midday. In practice, it's mostly enforced on those who cause trouble or forget to pay their tribute to the corregidor, who always seems to nap through his own orders. Still, the structure of life bends around the heat. Morning is for effort, afternoon is for drifting off under straw roofs, and evening is for beans and gossip. By the time you're 5, your body already understands that as soon as the sun tilts high overhead and the shadows narrow into sleepy blades, it's time to go limp like a hammock left in the breeze. The bells chime from the mission tower, one short, one long, 2 slow, and that's your cue. Bread sellers tuck away their trays. Blacksmiths lean on their anvils. Even the dogs collapse in the shade, legally lazy. It's oddly comforting to know that the system supports your afternoon dawdle. Siesta isn't just a nap, though. It's a form of legal protection. In a society where heat can be fatal, laws that slow you down might just save your life. Local codes, some of which still exist in dusty municipal archives, specify penalties for those caught overworking under the sun, especially if their labor involves animals, carts, or young apprentices. There are reports, quite dry ones, of fines levied on mule drivers for attempting deliveries during prohibited hours. often described in such precise legalese that you begin to wonder if colonial scribes enjoyed their jobs a little too much. But the oddest part, the siesta law sometimes applied to the enforcement officers themselves. In several regions, including parts of what is now Bolivia and southern Peru, city guards were legally excused from patrol during the afternoon, lest they fall ill in uniform. Imagine that. A law to legally protect you from enforcing other laws. One can only assume the criminals also observed the nap schedule. As you grow, this rule becomes part of your very bones. You come to believe, perhaps rightly, that life is meant to be divided between effort and stillness, noise and quiet, heat and drift. You help your mother shell beans in the morning, you count the cracks in the adobe ceiling after lunch, and you listen to your uncle grumble about how siesta is getting shorter these days because of new Spanish laws. He's exaggerating, of course. The siesta isn't going anywhere. The sun still climbs too high, and no one has invented ceiling fans. Even into your teenage years, siesta is enforced with gentle ferocity. Your school, if you're fortunate enough to attend the mission's reading class, pauses at midday. The friar insists that digestion and prayer require peace. You're given half a gourd of warm maize drink and sent to recline beneath the guava trees behind the chapel. There's always a goat nearby. There's always a goat in these stories. It smells like socks and rebellion. The goat doesn't care about the law. It bleeds through the whole nap window, and no one dares fine it. In fact, the existence of siesta opens the door to what legal scholars of the era called temporal discipline. Basically, the idea that the law could structure your day down to the hour. In your town, that's taken very literally. A local magistrate once tried to require every household to post a clay tablet by the door, listing their intended activity by hour. It didn't catch on, mostly because no one wanted to carve doing nothing into wet clay 4 times a day. Still, the habit sticks. Even into adulthood, you keep your midday hour sacred. You might be a cobbler or a scribe copying church documents onto paper that smells faintly of onion skins and candle wax. But as soon as the sun hovers directly above the thatch eaves, you down tools, stretch your back, and seek shade. Not because you're tired, necessarily, but because not doing so would feel like skipping a breath. And when you finally grow old, your back a little bent, your hands flecked with calluses and softened by decades of tortillas and ink, you find that the siesta has become more than a rule. It's a rhythm etched into your days. You no longer need the bells. Your body knows. Your eyelids start to droop on cue. The world tilts gently towards stillness. Somewhere nearby, a child is being scolded for making noise during the sacred hours. Somewhere else, a goat bleats defiantly, still unsanctioned. And so, you drift, wrapped not just in woven cloth, but in custom, in law, in the warm certainty that even the old Spanish Empire, with all its vanity and violence, once paused, just so everyone could nap. You're about 6 now, old enough to hold a broom, but still too small to reach the top shelf, where the dried plantains are hidden. It's morning in your colonial village, and your mother has sent you to sweep the dusty flagstones outside your modest home before the sun climbs too high. But just as you begin, her voice calls after you, not to scold, but to remind, make sure you don't whistle. You blink, a little confused. Whistling? But of course, you remember now there's a law against that. Whistling before noon is considered suspicious. Why? No one quite remembers, but some say it attracts snakes. Others say it's a signal for thieves. Either way, it's forbidden. And, like many things in colonial Latin America, it's oddly specific and surprisingly enforced. The morning air still clings to a trace of coolness as the sun spills over clay rooftops. Your feet shuffle across the uneven stones. Somewhere, a church bell clinks its way into clarity, chasing birds from their roosts. You pause to glance at the silhouette of the local alcalde. Yes, the one with the crooked hat, who paces stiffly outside his door with a notebook, the kind that smells like lemon sap and dried glue. He's jotting names, not because anything has happened, but because he's legally required to keep track of idle citizens who seem, quote, too cheerful before sunrise. And you, with your nearly whistled tune, were almost on the list. Yes, one of the more peculiar laws of your era involves the prohibition of excessive morning cheerfulness. Not in theory, of course, but in its applied form. Singing, laughing loudly, playing instruments, or appearing intoxicated before a certain hour could be considered disruptive to the public order. And as everyone knows, public order in your town depends largely on whether the alcalde is hungover or not. Still, it makes for a quiet dawn, and the soft hush before market hours is oddly soothing. You grow up in this subtle theater of performance and paranoia, where laws are half serious and half decorative. It's not that anyone thinks morning whistling will summon bandits. It's more that the legal code wants to keep everyone in a kind of serene, predictable mood. Because if the day begins with noise, who knows what kind of ideas might follow? By the time you reach your gangly teenage years, you begin to appreciate the logic behind such quietude. Morning is for the sacred, for chores, prayers, or staring into the steam rising from your bowl of mashed yuca. The town's barber is only allowed to open after the bell strikes 7. Too early, and he'd be fined for disturbing the contemplative rhythms of the populace. Imagine that. Getting fined for trimming beards too early. It happened. He framed the citation. Even the marketplace operates on a staggered hum. According to the royal ordinances of commerce, vendors are prohibited from shouting their wares until precisely 1 hour after the sun crests the eastern hill. You once saw a baker fined for hollering pan caliente at the wrong angle of daylight. Since then, he's taken to whispering his sales pitch until the official hour, which means for 1 bizarre hour every morning, you shop for bread in near silence, like monks choosing croissants. One of your neighbors, old Don Armando, who wears mismatched sandals and talks to his chickens, claims these laws come from Spain's obsession with harmony. Order, niño, he tells you, tapping his nose. The king wanted us orderly, even in the sounds we made. He's only partly right. Yes, Spanish colonial rule cherished conformity, but also control. And in places where rebellion bubbled like stew, left too long over fire, even noise had to be regulated. There's an actual law in one dusty codex from Lima prohibiting the use of tambourines within earshot of government buildings. The rationale? Tambourines provoke dancing, and dancing provokes opinions. And opinions, in the eyes of the crown, are best saved for confession. Still, music finds its way in. Your cousin, who plays the jarana when he's supposed to be feeding the pigs, learns to muffle the strings with a sack of beans. He plucks quietly in the shade of the banana trees, composing love songs that can't legally be performed until after siesta. There's even a legal distinction between melodic assembly and festive disorder, depending on whether or not there's clapping. By now, you've absorbed these peculiarities into your skin. You rise quietly. You step softly. You speak in low tones before noon, unless you're in the countryside, where the magistrates don't patrol and roosters enforce no rules. Still, when you visit your aunt in the hills, you notice something funny. People there whisper too. It's not about fear anymore. It's just comfortable. Custom, baked by sun and statute, has become habit. And of course, there are exceptions. On certain holy days, like Corpus Christi or the Feast of Santa Barbara, morning noise is encouraged, required even. Trumpets blare from balconies, firecrackers pop before breakfast. You remember one such morning, barely 8 years old, when a procession wound its way through town with banners, flutes, and dancers dressed as angels, their wings held up by sticks and string. That morning, the alcalde actually ordered people to be loud. He even paid the tambourine fine himself. The rumor says he used church funds. There's something soothing about knowing that even chaos, when scheduled by decree, has its place. Your town may be small, the walls cracked, the goats loud, but the rhythm of the day is written into law. It protects you from intrusion, from cacophony, from the wild thump of someone else's agenda. It gives you space and silence. You take this rhythm with you as you grow. In your 20s, you inherit a stall in the market, selling candles wrapped in pressed flower petals. But you never call out to customers until the shadow of the chapel aligns with the center stone of the plaza. That's the rule. And even though no one watches anymore, you follow it anyway, because it just feels right. One day, a traveling merchant from Caracas tries to drum up business by singing at dawn. You watch, amused, as 3 elderly women gather beside him and begin to hum louder, drowning him out with a hymn so somber it feels like a threat. He leaves the next morning. No fines, no punishments, just a quiet reminder that not all rules need enforcement. Some are enforced by tradition alone. By the time you're old, your hands softened by candle wax and familiarity. You rarely speak above a whisper before the sun reaches its perch. Children run past you, noisy and wide-eyed, and you smile with your mouth closed. They'll learn, or the old ladies will teach them. Either way, the laws, those oddly comforting laws, echo in the quiet spaces between steps and syllables. And every morning, even if no one's watching, you pause before you sweep, breathe in the stillness, and make sure not to whistle. It's somewhere around your 12th birthday, and you're old enough now to carry a basket of dried beans to the plaza without spilling more than a handful. Your feet know the rhythm of the cobblestones. Your fingers know how to pinch off a prayerful sign of the cross. Whenever you pass a doorway with a painted saint, and your mind, still clumsy with dreams, has just begun to notice the invisible lines drawn by law through the space around you. Because oddly enough, in your little colonial town, even the direction in which you walk has once been regulated. Not long ago, the local council issued an ordinance declaring that traffic in the main plaza should circulate clockwise on market days. Why? No one is quite sure anymore. Perhaps to emulate celestial order, or maybe just because the former governor got dizzy walking the other way. The result is that, to this day, you walk in deliberate circles to buy fruit, thread, or a slab of hard cheese, like a planet orbiting a very sweaty sun. Vendors will glare if you cut across their path or, heaven forbid, reverse direction. And heaven, in your village, seems to have very firm opinions about spatial harmony. You remember one afternoon, hot and heavy with the smell of cassava and horse sweat, when a new viceroy's messenger entered the plaza on a mule and trotted straight across it, diagonally. A scandal. 3 old men dropped their playing cards mid-hand. The apothecary gasped audibly. The parish bell rang twice for no known reason. The man was never fined, but he was served his lunch cold for a week. Justice, it seems, sometimes comes in the form of indifferent stew. The thing is, the colonial laws were never just about crime or punishment. They were about mood, about atmosphere. The right way to walk, the right tone to take, the exact distance you were expected to keep between yourself and the local priest. 4 paces, unless you were confessing. And yes, there was a law about that too. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You live in a world where streets are made of rules as much as stone. The paving is uneven, and your sandals slap noisily if you're not careful. But above the ground lies another layer, one composed of invisible pathways, permissible gestures, accepted silences, and highly specific permissions. Like the rule that says, you may not purchase more than 2 bunches of cilantro from the same seller before midday, lest the balance of trade be disturbed. This law is printed on a board, nailed to a tree. Its letters so faded, only the birds can read them now. Still, no one tests it, just in case. What's most curious is how much of this structure is oddly calming. You always know what to do, or at least what not to do. No running in the plaza, no sitting on the steps of the chapel unless you're over 40 or under 7. No pointing at statues with your left hand. No selling roasted peanuts during Mass unless the peanuts are unsalted, because salt is distracting apparently. At first, these laws feel like nonsense. But slowly, or over time, they wrap around you like a blanket. You find comfort in knowing that everyone else is pretending the same way. That the world is a kind of shared script, and your part, while not particularly heroic, is at least well rehearsed. As a teenager, you try once to rebel. You step into the plaza from the west gate instead of the east. You walk counterclockwise. You chew on a bit of sugar cane with your hat tipped back, a real rascal. And then, just as you reach the bakery, your uncle appears out of nowhere, his eyebrows raised so high they nearly form a question mark. He doesn't scold you. He doesn't need to. The silence is enough. You return to the proper path. No words exchanged. There's a reason for that, too. Silence carries weight in your town, and there was a decree once issued that forbade shouting between households unless the matter involved livestock or death. For everything else, you knock 3 times and then say your business with indoor volume. Your neighbor once forgot this and was fined a whole jug of goat's milk. He still complains, though not very loudly, and it's not just walking or talking, it's even where you may lean. A regulation from 1683 declared that young men were not permitted to lounge against church walls during festivals due to the disruption of reverent symmetry. The phrase stuck. Even today, you sometimes hear a vendor mutter reverent symmetry under her breath when she catches a boy slouching near the well. But don't worry, it's not all constraint. These strange rules also create peculiar freedoms. For instance, on every 3rd Thursday, the town crier is allowed by law to sing his announcements instead of shouting them. The effect is both delightful and utterly confusing. Prices of maize have increased. He might trill in a wobbly falsetto while stray dogs bark their objections. You used to laugh, but now you find it charming. You hum along. Eventually, you begin to see the laws not as barriers, but as lullabies. They dictate the pace, the tone, the curve of each daily path. They shape the market into a slow-moving dance. They hush the mornings and stretch the evenings. They make your home feel safe, not because there's no danger, but because the rules give shape to the unknown. You never quite know how many of the laws are still in force. Some were written by long-dead bishops with an affection for order and a dislike of almond pies. Some came from dusty edicts sent from Lima or Madrid, interpreted loosely and scribbled into the town ledger by men with shaky quills and poetic tendencies. Others were invented entirely by your neighbors and passed off as legal truth because someone once said so while holding a stick. But regardless of origin, they remain, not in ink, but in habit. And so you carry your beans clockwise. You bow slightly at each saintly fresco just in case. You lower your voice when the bell tolls 8. You eat your cilantro sparingly and never, ever lean on the chapel wall during festival week, because deep down, beneath your polite smile and predictable footsteps, you suspect that even if no one remembers where the law came from, the law remembers you. The heat settles low across the rooftops as you grow into your late teenage years, and you begin to realize that rules in your colonial town aren't just about obedience, they're about rhythm. You don't live in a society ruled by fear or by strict patrols or even by terribly competent judges. You live in a place where time and tradition hold hands and nod politely at the courthouse door, where the law exists less to punish and more to guide the tempo of your everyday. As if every step, gesture, and market transaction must adhere to the melody of a very sleepy waltz. Take, for instance, the legal requirement for siesta. Not the suggestion, not a gentle cultural preference. An actual written ordinance, signed and sealed in 1721, that mandates the closing of shops and the muffling of footsteps between noon and 3 in the afternoon, unless rain is falling, in which case you are permitted to yawn out loud. If the sun is high, though, and the clouds behave, then shutters must creak shut, hammocks must swing slowly, and conversation is limited to whispers or humming. You learn this young, when your own effort to sell mangoes during siesta earns your family a visit from the town beadle, who arrives barefoot to preserve the silence, and simply gestures at your mango crate with the sadness of a disappointed uncle. And you get it, eventually. The streets at midday are not for business. They are for dreams, for old women to sip lemon water and press their cheeks against cool tile walls, for cats to stretch into their final, boneless form, for men to smoke and pretend not to nap, and for children to practice being invisible. You too begin to appreciate this carved-out pause in the law's design, this sleepy commandment that offers a temporary escape from both heat and duty. Laws in your corner of colonial Latin America often walk hand in hand with weather. There is a statute from 1706 that prohibits singing out loud during thunderstorms unless the song is a hymn. Apparently, the town council once feared that raucous melodies might offend the angels in charge of lightning. You've never tested this law, but you once saw an older man begin a ballad during a heavy downpour, only to stop halfway through when thunder cracked directly above his head. He muttered an apology to the sky and switched to a psalm. Whether this was legal compliance or superstition, you may never know. But either way, the rain softened. Not all regulations are spiritual or poetic, though. Many are plainly practical in the dullest possible sense. There is a rule about how many chickens you may tie to a single stake in the market square. 3. No more. 4 is chaos, according to a decree penned by someone named Don Mateo, who once tripped over a particularly belligerent 4th chicken. And yet, within the cluck and scratch of foul politics, you find stability. When you walk to market and see 3 chickens to a steak and not 4, you feel a sense of cosmic balance. The law is working. You discover, too, that the law loves to whisper in your wardrobe. A colonial regulation from 1689 outlines specific colors to be worn on feast days. Blue for St. James, green for the Harvest Festival, white for mourning, and pink only with written permission from the local priest. You once wore a pink sash without approval and were not fined, but the baker refused to sell you bread for an hour. That was enough. Now you keep your wardrobe sorted by ecclesiastical hue, just in case. Your town's laws are not merely restrictions, they're rituals. They organize chaos into ceremony. They transform what might otherwise be accidents of custom into well-maintained expectations. This is especially true when it comes to greetings. There is a 17th century edict that outlines the proper form of address based on time of day, rank, and direction of approach. If you greet someone from the left while the sun is in descent, you must use a different phrase than if you approach from the right at dawn. Most people don't remember the exact wording, but they remember the tone, and that's enough. You learn to smile in the right shape, nod with the correct weight, and let your voice glide into the acceptable register for mid-morning, middle-class, southbound politeness. And of course, as you age into adulthood, you begin to see that the laws also guard you from awkwardness. There is a regulation about how long you may remain at a neighbor's house after receiving a cup of water. 15 minutes, unless offered a second beverage. Another law says that if 2 people reach the town fountain at once, the one with the lighter bucket must wait. These rules eliminate the need for confrontation. They save face. They allow everyone to blame the law, rather than admit annoyance. You even begin to suspect that certain laws exist purely to help people avoid feelings, like the decree that forbids the public recitation of poetry without a license, or the one that limits how often a widow may speak fondly of her late husband in the town square. Twice per week, maximum. That one, you think, was written by a very tired magistrate who had heard one too many ghost love stories before breakfast. Still, these rules bring a strange serenity. They fill in the cracks of social life like soft moss. You feel secure, knowing that you don't need to invent behavior. You can simply perform it, like reading from a playbook passed down by generations of dusty scribes. Even when you don't understand a law's purpose, its presence is enough. It's the constancy you trust, not the logic. And when you finally take over your parents' corner stall in the market, selling small charms made of twine and dried flowers, you find yourself quoting laws to your customers. Gently, of course. Only 2 charms per person during eclipse week, you say with a sleepy smile, though no one's sure if the eclipse clause is still in force. No one challenges you. They just nod. The law is the law, even if it's not written down anymore. At night, the laws follow you home like cats. They curl around your ankles in the dark. They remind you not to whistle indoors, not to wear your hat after sunset, not to leave spoons upright in clay pots. You comply not out of fear, but out of habit. And in the moonlight, with shutters drawn and floor cool beneath your bare feet, you find it oddly reassuring that someone, somewhere, once cared enough to regulate these things, even if they were bored, even if they were making it all up. You wake early one morning, long before the roosters remember to declare the sun, to the sound of an old man sweeping the street with a palm broom, the bristles scraping softly like a lullaby in reverse. He does this every day, not because he's paid to, and not because he likes it, but because of a law passed in 1712 that requires each able-bodied man over the age of 50 to sweep the block in front of his own door before the third church bell. A strange requirement, perhaps, but one taken seriously, especially by those who view retirement not as a rest, but as a slow return to civic obligation. You hear the bristles and think, order. And in this way, the law bleeds into the ordinary fabric of life, not as a hard edge, but as a soft echo. You come to understand that these oddly relaxing colonial laws are less about command than about choreography. It's less a matter of following and more a matter of knowing the steps. And sweeping before sunrise, while the sky is still lavender and the dogs are still dreaming, becomes one of those steps you take without thought, as natural as breathing. Just like the rule about bread. Yes, bread. In your town, and perhaps yours alone, there's a dusty statute, still recited on feast days, which insists that loaves must weigh precisely 612 grams. Not 610, not 613, but 612. This figure, believed to be a biblical reference by some, and a tribute to a former governor's birthday by others, is enforced not with scales, but with the traditional palm test. The local inspector, a quiet man with one eyebrow permanently raised in suspicion, goes from bakery to bakery, pressing his hand on the tops of loaves. If it flattens too easily, the dough was too wet. If it resists, the loaf is too heavy. A perfect loaf sags slightly, like a tired smile. You once saw the inspector give a rare nod of approval to a baker who wept with pride. The bread law is peculiar, but beloved. It makes you feel safe to know that even the air pockets in your daily sustenance have been judged and measured, that there is comfort in knowing someone somewhere has drawn a line between acceptable crumb and criminal crust. It's the kind of regulation that doesn't punish, but reassures. It tells you, without saying so, that someone has thought this through. This is a theme that repeats itself again and again. You discover an old legal ledger that dictates exactly how many steps a bride may take alone between the chapel and her new husband's house. 49, unless the distance is more than 1 furlong, in which case she may take 62. No explanation is given. You imagine some colonial official, half-drunk and full of opinions, scribbling this number into the margins of a law book, because his niece once tripped on the 50th step. Still, the tradition holds. During weddings, someone always counts, silently mouthing numbers like a prayer. You too begin to count things, seeds in a tamarind pod, sips before setting down a cup, the precise number of birds on a rooftop before rain. You suspect that everyone counts, quietly and without fuss, as if trying to keep pace with the rules of a world gently tilted toward the absurd. And isn't it funny, you think, how counting brings calm, how measuring something, anything, becomes a form of prayer? There's a calming law about windows, too. Specifically, how wide they may be opened during the dry season. According to municipal code, windows on the east-facing side of the plaza must not be opened more than 2/3 of their width unless the temperature exceeds 32 degrees, in which case a supplemental cloth screen must be installed. No one truly enforces this anymore, but people still talk about it as though someone might. You once saw a merchant measuring his neighbor's shutters with a stick marked in fingers. Not inches, not centimeters, fingers. When asked why, he simply said, "It's the law." You begin to see laws everywhere, not just in the books, but in the habits, in the way people walk, pause, greet, sip, turn, and hum. There is a statute that requires all public letters posted in the square to begin with a blessing and end with the writer's favorite proverb. This has led to some surprisingly poetic advertisements, like the one that read, "Blessings be upon you all, hen's eggs for sale, 4 for a coin, a watched kettle never boils." You bought the eggs, mostly out of respect. Some laws are so old, no one remembers their purpose. There is a rule about not bringing turtles to the town hall, though no one can say why. And yet, one day, when a boy arrives with a turtle under his arm, there's a hush, a reverent silence, as if everyone recognizes that something profound has just occurred. The boy is not scolded. He is gently turned away, the turtle blinking slowly. The law has spoken. Even children sense these rules, not as oppression, but as lullabies wrapped in parchment. When playing marbles, they whisper of the ban on blue glass during Lent. When jumping rope, they chant about the 7-stone rule at funerals, though none of them have been to one. You remember these games and the way they stitched law and play together like quilt squares, warming your sense of order. And yes, the laws also protect you from chaos, just enough to feel safe, not smothered. There's a law that if two oxen collide on a Monday, the owner of the smaller ox must buy the other owner dinner. This has led to some truly theatrical collisions, with owners eyeing each other before the crash, then pretending to be shocked. It's a dinner ritual now. Oxen as excuse for tamales and laughter. But perhaps the most relaxing law of all is the silence law, enacted in 1659, reaffirmed in 1694, and never formally repealed. It mandates that for 10 minutes after every sunset, no one in the plaza shall speak above a murmur. No drums, no shoes on stone, just the gentle rustle of fabric, the last fluttering birds, and the sound of the sun tucking itself beneath the earth. You grow to love this pause. You wait for it. You plan your walks so you're always near the plaza when it begins. It's not enforced. It's simply honored. You learn that laws do not always need enforcement to matter. Sometimes being remembered is enough. Sometimes a rule is simply a reminder that peace is possible, that someone once believed the world could be arranged gently, and that belief has never quite left the walls of your little colonial town. And as you fold your clothes one evening, 3 shirts, 2 tunics, 1 sash, pink this time, but fully permitted, you find yourself smiling at the memory of a law you've never needed, but always liked. The one that says a citizen may request a song from the town bell ringer once per year, provided it is sung quietly and from memory. You've never heard anyone ask. But oh, how lovely it is to know that you could. You're exactly 22 days old when you first hear the rustle of paper that isn't paper. Your father, though not much of a talker, carefully unfolds a faded, crinkled decree issued in 1761, printed on something called amate bark, which flakes at the corners and smells faintly of dust, honey, and thyme. The decree itself is boring in the most satisfying way. It outlines how many candles each altar in your parish must have lit on feast days, with penalties for overzealous illumination. Too many flames, the document explains with alarming confidence, may confuse the angels. No one questions it. The angels, after all, have a lot on their plate. As you grow older, you discover that every candle flickering gently near a saint's foot or a virgin's gaze is part of a rhythm set long ago. 3 per saint, 1 per martyr, 5 for Our Lady of Sorrows, but never more than 11 per altar. You try to remember the combinations like they're multiplication tables. On Holy Week, the Capuchin friar tiptoes around the chapel before sunrise to count the candles, and everyone watches him like he's measuring the stars. It comforts you to know someone's keeping track. And that's how most of the old colonial laws begin to live in your bones. Not with gavel and ink, but with murmurs and gestures and tiny ceremonial acts that seem invisible to strangers. Like the law of proper shading, a regulation from a 1724 mining ordinance that stated, quite clearly, that street vendors' awnings must extend no more than 3 palms beyond the stone edge to ensure uniformity and supposedly the dignity of the sunlight. You're not sure what that last part means, but people say it with a straight face. And so the market on Sundays is a patchwork of striped cloth squares, each carefully aligned, not for the sake of shade, but for respect. You catch yourself once pulling a neighbor's awning back 2 fingers width, not even thinking about it. They nod in thanks, no words exchanged. It's the law. Laws become muscle memory. You learn of the regulation of midnight rise, which, while not enforced anymore, still gets mentioned every time someone serves a late-night meal. Originally, it restricted rice sales after midnight to prevent illegal feasts during periods of mourning, a time when celebration was forbidden. The law never stopped anyone from cooking, but it gave gossipers something to whisper about. They're boiling rice at 2 in the morning? Must be a scandal. You hear your grandmother say this with a wink. Later, you pass by the home in question and smell garlic, onion, maybe even a dash of saffron. And somehow that midnight rebellion seems like the gentlest kind. Colonial Latin America, you come to understand, was a place where laws were written with the same pen that drafted lullabies. One such lullaby is the law governing mirror placement. Specifically, mirrors could not be hung in bedrooms directly opposite the bed. Officials once claimed it might fracture the soul upon waking, though this was later revised to encourage vanity among the impressionable. You don't own a mirror, but when you stay with cousins, you notice theirs is always turned to the wall at night, then flipped again at dawn. A quiet ritual. No one explains it. They just do it. This respect for placement carries over into other odd corners of life. A community in the Highlands still follows the law of symmetrical chickens. Yes, chickens, which requires that poultry pens be constructed equidistant from water sources and grain storage to promote balance in moral labor. Farmers repeat this like a proverb. Symmetrical chickens, symmetrical heart. You chuckle the first time, then you help build such a pen and realize it's calming. Something about those equal lengths, measured by footsteps in the dirt, feels soothing. You begin to crave these symmetrical oddities, these old systems that seem absurd until you live with them long enough to miss them when they're gone, like the rule of open curtains on Saint Mondays. Each town had its own saint's day, but Monday belonged to St. Nicholas of the Rain Barrels, and in his honor, all curtains facing the public road had to be open until noon. Why? No one agrees. Some say it was to let the saint judge household cleanliness. Others say it was to discourage laziness. Children just liked peeking in. You remember walking down Calle de la Mula and seeing room after room awash in filtered light. Each window like a glowing eye. Even the grumpiest houses complied. Even yours. It's remarkable how these little rules press their shapes into your life without ever quite feeling like control. They shape behavior the way riverbanks shape water. Softly, through time. There's even a law about how bells should sound. That is, the regulation of harmonious tolling, an ecclesiastical mandate that required bell towers to tune their bells not just to the right pitches, but to each other, so that the sound of one town's chapel wouldn't clash with the next. Tuners were brought in from Quito, Lima, Oaxaca, sometimes on mule back, just to adjust the pitch of a bronze tongue with a mallet and a prayer. You once met a bell tuner, a man with 2 bad knees and perfect pitch, who said he could hear the sin in a misaligned chime. Whether that's true or not, you couldn't say. But his face, when the bell rang true, that was holy. Even the way people dress is stitched into old laws. You grow up watching neighbors argue politely about the legality of hat brim width. A law from 1746 required that brims not extend more than a palm's width past the ear, supposedly to allow sunlight fair access to the street. The idea was that shadow belonged to buildings, not people. To this day, certain families keep their tailoring scissors tied with a blue ribbon in memory of the tailor who was fined for trimming brims too generously. You wonder if that tailor ever felt proud of his defiance. And still, these laws continue to comfort. Because they speak not of punishment, but of presence. Someone once cared enough to say, no more than 3 goes per street corner, unless the corner is blessed. Or, if your house faces the mountain, paint your door red on solstices. It all sounds like fiction. Until it doesn't. Until you're the one quietly brushing the red paint onto your lintel at dawn. Just in case. Just in case. Because in a world where everything else moves too fast, too loud, too cruel, these oddly relaxing colonial laws give you something slower, something gentler, something that says, here, in this little piece of time, you may breathe. You are just over 2 months old now, and already your days begin to settle into a rhythm. Though you wouldn't call it that yourself, of course, since your concept of rhythm mostly consists of sleeping when the wind shifts and waking when a mule brays 4 houses away. But still, there's a curious regularity to everything around you, and it all seems to pulse gently with the weight of very old rules. Some are whispered and worn smooth like a pebble in a pocket. Others still carry the clunky stiffness of parchment. But one in particular lingers in your little corner of the village with a strange, sleepy persistence. The law of public napping. Yes, there was a time when nap law existed. It wasn't called that officially, of course. No legal scroll ever had the courage to title itself quite so boldly. But if you look at the dusty provincial ordinances of 1782, tucked between the guidelines for ox cart wheel spacing and the ecclesiastical margin of error for tower clock ringing, you'll find it. A clause allowing adults over the age of 50, regardless of social class, to claim shaded seating in public plazas between the hours of noon and 3, so long as they promised, verbally, solemnly, not to conduct any business while seated. To rest the soul as well as the flesh, the wording insists. And somehow, no one mocks it. You naturally are not 50, but your neighbor is, and he's very proud of his napping rights. He wears a green sash on Wednesdays, just in case anyone forgets. The rule, he tells you, one lazy afternoon as he leans back against the adobe bench with a straw fan across his belly, was never strictly enforced. But everyone followed it anyway, because it made things gentler, more predictable. You'll see, he mumbles through half-lidded eyes, one day you'll wish everything came with a designated nap time. And so, as you learn to toddle and stagger your way toward the shady plaza, you come to associate the scent of resting elders with calm, the slow creak of wooden chairs, the swish of fans, the occasional hum of a lullaby in a dialect you don't yet understand. A nap isn't just a nap. It's a civic right, a ritual, a legal hush, Not all quiet things in the colonies were so dignified, though. There's also the law of noisy footwear, drafted somewhere in the early 1700s by a minor magistrate in a town that no longer exists, but was once extremely passionate about silence. According to this regulation, anyone whose sandals or shoes made an audibly offensive sound while walking on cobblestone streets during evening hours could be fined 2 candles or 1 roast fowl, depending on their means. The definition of audibly offensive was never clarified, but old women took it seriously. You once saw your aunt pour melted tallow along the leather seams of her sandals just to soften the impact. When asked, she only shrugged. The stones remember. And indeed, the streets in your childhood seem designed not for haste, but for hush. It's no surprise, then, that even animals obey certain laws of sound. Or rather, their owners do. In your region, a decree from 1790 required that roosters be kept in woven sound-muffling baskets between sunset and dawn, especially in districts where nuns resided. The baskets, oddly shaped and painted with soft motifs of moons and lilies, became an entire cottage industry. You once fell asleep against one, warm with feathers inside. The rooster didn't complain, neither did the nuns. Sleep was respected like currency. In this world, governed by sleepy rituals and bureaucratic slowness, even the act of waiting becomes a kind of obedience to law. There is, for instance, the rule that no more than 6 people may stand in line for anything unless a 7th person brings a stool. The stool, then, belongs to the person who waits the longest. It sounds fake, but you've seen it in action. 7 folks lined up for fish on market day, the last holding a wobbly stool like a badge of office. Legal line now. He grinned, and everyone relaxed. You begin to notice how often objects are part of legal compliance. Not fines or handcuffs or ink-stained stamps, but ordinary things. Stools, fans, baskets, candles, shawls, even ribbons. There is a law, still repeated in sing-song tones by your cousin, that mandates the use of yellow ribbons on the doors of homes where bread was baked between noon and sunset, to prevent confusion of aromas and encourage moral digestion. You ask what that means. No one knows, but the ribbons are pretty, and the law lives on. Sometimes, too, laws find their way into lullabies. There's a melody your nurse hums while rocking you gently, one that traces its origins back to a regulation on child naming from the year 1733. According to the edict, no child may be named after a non-canonized saint without additional blessings from 2 separate bishops. The tune itself includes a list of acceptable names, all woven into the rhythm of the cradle. Ignacio, Juan, Matias, Clara. It goes, and you fall asleep somewhere around Lucia every time. Some laws are recited without paper. Your mother, for example, keeps to the rule of hearth silence, passed down orally and rarely written. During the first hour after the evening fire is extinguished, no one is to speak above a whisper. It's the hour of glowing embers, she says, when words should curl like smoke. You once asked if this was a law or a poem. She smiled. Yes, the most fascinating of these laws, though, is the Edict of Complaints. Now, technically, this one wasn't a law at all, but a social rule enforced with enough consistency that everyone treated it like statute. In short, townsfolk were forbidden, By unspoken agreement, from filing complaints on rainy days, officials would simply refuse to write them down. Too wet for justice, they'd say. People came to embrace the odd rule. When thunder rolled and roofs leaked, neighbors who might have yelled instead shrugged and shared a cup of cinnamon tea. Tomorrow, they'd mutter, when it's dry, we'll be furious. You suspect that rain was the colony's most effective peacekeeper. And so, day by day, law by lullaby, you grow not only taller, but quieter, slower, more observant. You notice the rules that govern not just streets and hats, but moods and sighs and gestures pass between people like folded notes. A nod becomes law, a silence becomes ordinance. A gentle hand on the shoulder is the enforcement agency of some long-forgotten decree about walking pace or conversation volume. And you, without even trying, become a citizen of this sleepy empire, built not on power, but on habit. The laws cradle you. They don't just guide what you can do. They suggest how you ought to feel, especially when nothing in particular is happening, which truthfully is most of the time. And in that not happening, in that long exhale of a town ruled by rest, you find peace. By now, you've shed the wobbly knees of toddlerhood and learned to walk the dusty footpaths of your town with a kind of cautious confidence, the kind earned only after tripping face first into a thorn bush precisely 3 times. You've memorized the smell of damp adobe after a rain, the sound of wooden shutters flapping lazily in a breeze, and the exact creak that your grandmother's rocking chair makes on a humid morning. But most of all, you've become strangely attuned to something other children your age ignore completely. The rules that hover quietly in the background of every adult conversation, every sideways glance, every tut-tit muttered over a basket of overripe figs. In this sleepy corner of colonial Latin America, even a whisper seems to carry legal weight. And as you explore the world around you, you start to learn which laws are strict, which are soft, and which are just for show. Take, for instance, the regulation of decorative fruit. Yes, that's a thing. You discover it by accident while playing with pebbles beneath the kitchen window, eavesdropping as your aunt explains to a neighbor, quite seriously, that the cluster of wax bananas on her entryway table must be rearranged immediately, or she risks violating Article 6 of the Municipal Aesthetic Ordinance of 1765. The rule, as far as you can understand it, states that no more than 3 artificial fruits may be displayed in a single visible container, unless at least one of them is a citrus. You don't know what a citrus is yet, but the neighbor nods solemnly and swaps a fake pear for a fake orange. Crisis averted. It sounds ridiculous, but the rule has a purpose. One buried under layers of social nicety and dusty colonial pride. Decorative fruit, it turns out, was once a subtle marker of wealth and taste. Display too many, and you were considered gaudy. Display the wrong ones, and you risked being mistaken for someone from the next village over, which, in your aunt's words, would be a fate worse than tax. And speaking of tax, there's the fascinating tale of the law of shadowed commerce. In towns with exceptionally bright sun, and yours is nothing if not aggressively sun-drenched, local officials once passed a decree stipulating that any vendor whose goods cast a shadow longer than the goods themselves at noon could not charge full price. Why? something to do with fairness and solar advantage. You're not sure. But every market day, at precisely midday, vendors pull out measuring rods and pace around their carts like sun priests deciphering omens. A chicken whose shadow crosses into the adjacent salt pile must be discounted. A shawl that doesn't cast a shadow at all, because it's under an umbrella, may be sold at premium. No one questions it. It's just how things are. And it isn't just commerce that sunlight regulates. There's also the lore of the lantern choir. You learn this during one of those slow, honey-colored evenings when your uncle decides it's time for you to see a real nighttime lore in action. He takes you to the central square, where a trio of elderly men, dressed in matching tunics stitched with moon motifs, begin humming softly as they light the lanterns around the plaza. It's part performance, part legal requirement. Each lantern must be lit to a specific tune, in a specific order, starting with the westernmost post and ending by the church fountain. Failure to complete the melody voids the lighting, and someone must start again. Once, during a dry season, when the humming sounded more like wheezing, they had to redo the whole circuit 4 times before it counted. The plaza was bathed in light, but nobody could legally sit on the benches until the 3rd verse of the final hymn was sung. You sat there for nearly an hour, blinking at moths and wondering if light had always been this bureaucratic. But of course, light has nothing on noise. The law of acceptable volume is one of your favorites, not because of the law itself, which is confusing, but because of the decibel stick. That's what people call it. A long, polished rod that an official named Marta carries with her every Sunday. Marta is stern, wears a hat with a feather, and taps her stick twice against the ground whenever she thinks a conversation is getting too loud. If she taps 3 times, you have to lower your voice and give her a biscuit. It's not in the law. It's just what she expects. You once asked your cousin if Marta was real or part of a town-wide prank. Both, he said, nodding like that explained everything. And maybe it does. Because here, in this old world, laced with sleepy customs and quietly absurd ordinances, the line between legality and tradition is thinner than the skin of a guava. People don't always remember where the rules came from, but they follow them anyway. Sometimes out of respect, sometimes out of habit, mostly because doing so feels like being part of something. Something big, gentle, and very, very slow. Even meals are governed. There's the ordinance of dessert silence, passed in 1778, after a particularly rowdy incident involving custard and politics. Now it's customary to eat sweets without speaking, as a show of gratitude and restraint. Your grandmother says it's because sugar used to be taxed so heavily that each spoonful was considered a moment of civic reflection. So you sit, chew slowly, and listen to the wind shuffle the curtains. Dessert is the quietest part of your day. Then there's the lore of window greetings. If 2 people wave at each other from windows on opposite sides of the street, at least one must include a compliment with the wave. Failure to compliment results in social imbalance and, allegedly, bad weather. That last part was added later by a grandmother with no patience for rudeness. You test it out once by waving silently at your neighbor across the way. It rains for 3 days. You never forget again. And lastly, though lastly never means much in this place, there's the rule of dust-free hour. Every afternoon at 4 p.m., brooms are put away. Carpets are left to their fate. The dust settles wherever it pleases. Why? Because sweeping after 4 is considered bad luck and possibly even illegal under the old Domestic Quietude Act, which no one has read in over a century, but everyone quotes with suspicious confidence. Your chores end promptly at 3:59, and so you sit, snack in hand, watching dust float through sunbeams like golden feathers, listening to the distant hum of a lantern hymn or the soft whoomp of Marta's decibel stick in the plaza. You're not quite sure where the laws end and the lullabies begin, but it doesn't really matter, because here, in your corner of colonial Latin America, where fruit must behave, shadows must be polite, and silence is measured like currency, you're wrapped not just in blankets and routine, but in a kind of legal daydream. An oddly comforting cocoon of dusty rules and whispered rituals that somehow, despite everything, make you feel right at home. You wake up the next morning, your straw mat slightly askew beneath your back, and you take a moment to stretch, very slowly, because moving too quickly after sunrise is, according to the elders' manual of good awakening practices, discouraged. Not illegal per se, but ill-advised, which in your town might as well carry the same weight. The sun isn't even fully risen yet, just painting the adobe walls with the faintest hint of peach. But you're already aware of the ritual unfolding across town, one that happens every single day, with more precision than the cathedral clock, the enforcement of the law of rooster rotation. Yes, you heard that right. Roosters, those reliable and often overconfident alarm systems of colonial life, are regulated in your neighborhood by a law written, allegedly, in response to a disagreement between two prominent farming families back in 1702. Apparently, both families' roosters crowed within seconds of each other, and neither bird was willing to budge. What followed was a scandalous standoff that escalated into dueling serenades, sleep-deprived livestock, and one very bewildered magistrate who, rather than settle the matter with swords or fines, simply mandated a rotating schedule. From then on, every household with a rooster had to log their bird's crowing time on a weekly rooster register, which was maintained in the town archives by a woman named Estelita, who, incidentally, had never owned a rooster in her life, but was remarkably punctual. Your family's rooster, Claudio, is assigned the fourth crowing slot this week. He takes his duties seriously. He's even developed a little pre-crow stretch routine, as if warming up for a concert. You watch him puff up on the fence post, checking both sides as though waiting for applause. No one claps, of course. That would break the law of early silence, which states that no clapping, whistling, or harp plucking shall take place before the hour of 6, unless it is performed by a licensed troubadour in mourning attire. By the time Claudio lets out his official cock-a-doodle-doo, your neighbor's windows are creaking open, and the town is waking with the solemn ceremony of a village that considers getting up both a civic responsibility and a mildly competitive sport. Your first task of the day is to help your father in the courtyard, where you prepare for the town's weekly inspection of the stones. This law, older than most of the houses, requires that all courtyard stones be realigned every Friday in accordance with the diagram of harmony and drainage set forth by an engineer monk sometime in the 1680s. No one quite remembers what the monk's name was, but he left behind a scroll with 27 different diagrams, each more puzzling than the last. The townspeople, in an effort to honor his legacy without going completely mad, agreed to rotate through the diagrams one at a time, changing the position of their courtyard stones accordingly. Today is diagram number 12, also known as the spiral of serene waters. Your father takes it very seriously, crouching with a wooden protractor and calling out instructions like 7 degrees to the left, or align with the shadow of the pomegranate. You don't really understand the mechanics, but you've grown to appreciate the rhythm of it. The scraping of stone against stone, the way the morning light catches on quartz pebbles, the way your father's eyebrows furrow in deep geometric concentration. And then, as always, a bell rings from the town center, marking the start of the hour of regulated greetings. From 9 dun to 10 gunt a.m., greetings must be sincere, moderately verbose, and include at least one compliment about the weather. This isn't just social etiquette, it's the law. Specifically, the Ordinance for Socially Appropriate Salutations, passed in 1746 to combat excessive terseness among citizens and the plague of unfriendly nods. Psht. Failure to comply can result in a mild scolding from the town greeter, a portly gentleman named Signor Bastian, who wears a sash embroidered with the phrase, "Speak kindly, lest you pay fines in shame." You spot him near the baker's stall, inspecting a conversation between 2 tired vendors, who, to your horror, have skipped the weather entirely. He interrupts with a firm cough and gently suggests they restart their greeting, this time including something poetic about the breeze. They oblige sheepishly. You decide to wave with enthusiasm at the butcher's daughter and exclaim, "What a delightfully moderate morning for drying sausages." She smiles. You're safe, but the laws don't pause just because it's mid-morning. You accompany your grandmother to the apothecary to buy something for her knees. She has stiff joints and an even stiffer interpretation of the law of herbal fairness, which says that all medicinal ingredients must be presented in pairs. So no one plant feels more important than another. You once asked her if plants could feel jealousy. She narrowed her eyes and muttered something about saffron and bay leaf still not speaking to each other. At the apothecary, she insists that the nettle must be purchased alongside a sprig of mint. The apothecary shrugs, wraps them together in parchment, and says, "That's how it's always been." The phrase is both explanation and shield, used dozens of times a day in your town, whenever logic begins to evaporate like morning dew on a hot tile roof. After lunch, silent of course, because it's followed by the law of digestive reflection, which mandates that everyone remains still and thoughtful for a full 30 minutes post-meal. You go for a walk with your older cousin. He brings you to the field near the irrigation canal and teaches you about the law of nonchalant wading. This one's technically unwritten, but everyone knows it. If you cross a stream, you must do so with deliberate calm and an expression that communicates, "I do this every day." Splashing is frowned upon. Running is a scandal. Any hint of excitement may attract a fine, or worse, A lecture from the Water Dignity Council, whose chairman once caught a teenager skipping stones and forced him to recite 30 lines of aquatic poetry as penance. You step into the stream with all the grace you can muster. The water is cold, tickling your ankles. Your cousin watches approvingly. You have passed another invisible test of community life. As the sun dips low and shadows stretch their legs across the cracked earth, the town enters its favorite part of the week, the inspection of intentional crookedness. In colonial Latin America, nothing is more suspicious than perfection. A perfectly straight row of hedges, an immaculate tablecloth, or an absolutely symmetrical stack of wood might imply vanity, or worse, foreign influence. So once a week, homes are assessed for tasteful irregularities. Your neighbor, always eager to impress, has placed one slightly chipped ceramic jug among a lineup of pristine ones. Another has painted a single window frame slightly off-center. Your family's contribution is the stair step that squeaks one beat too late. It's charming. It's intentional. It's legally delightful. You watch the inspector nod appreciatively as he observes your family's squeaky stare, murmuring, subtly dissonant, "Very good." The sky darkens, the lantern choir hums again, and as night folds gently around your village, you realize that these laws, odd, lopsided, dusty, and quietly specific, aren't just rules. They're lullabies in disguise. They rock you into routine, cradle you with expectation, and whisper, in their own bureaucratic way, that everything is still in order. And in a world full of unknowns, isn't that what we crave? Just a little order, a regulation for roosters, a compliment at the window, a good excuse to walk slowly through cold water with a solemn face. You wake the next morning to the sound of pages turning, dry parchment whispering through calloused fingers just outside your window, accompanied by the slow creak of a wooden stool adjusting its joints. It's the town's appointed law reciter, Doña Amparo, who, by virtue of the 1733 statute of recited reinforcement, is legally obligated to spend 1 hour every Wednesday reading aloud from the Book of Reasonable Mandates. You can't see her, but you picture her perched on the edge of her embroidered cushion, back ramrod straight, shawl pulled tight, lips moving with all the sleepy conviction of a woman who's read the same 600 rules once a week for 42 years. Today she's deep into the section on chimney behavior. The law of decorative smoke, surprisingly precise, dictates that all chimney smoke must drift to the left if it's a market day, and to the right if it's a feast day. On regular days, smoke is allowed to wander, modestly, never aggressively. The reasoning behind this law is shrouded in as much smoke as the chimneys themselves, though local legend says it began after a particularly indecisive priest couldn't tell whether a feast had begun or ended. The result? 24 hours of civic confusion and a ban on ambiguous smoke ever since. You watch from the kitchen as your uncle takes a small broom and gently waves smoke toward the right, just to be safe. It's not a feast day, but he claims it never hurts to get ahead of divine expectations. The smoke obeys with the sluggish grace of a sleepy ghost, curling past the bougainvillea as if nodding in agreement. After breakfast, bread, cheese, and a fig so ripe it collapses onto your thumb like a sigh, you accompany your cousin to the town well. He's on bucket duty today, which comes with its own set of legal constraints. See, the law of fair water lifting states that each household must draw water using one hand only, alternating left and right every day, to ensure equity of limb fatigue. The rule was originally written by a committee of left-handed weavers who demanded justice after generations of sore shoulders and cultural neglect. Your cousin, predictably right-handed, struggles a bit as he hauls the bucket with his left. The rope wobbles, the pulley creaks. You stand close in case he needs rescuing, which you secretly hope he does, because it would make for an excellent retelling during the next storytelling circle, which occurs, by law, on Thursday evenings after the ringing of the second goat bell. By midday, the town is preparing for one of its more beloved spectacles, the enforcement of the shoe law. This particular law, often recited at festivals and weddings for comic effect, declares that every citizen over the age of 9 must, at least once per month, wear a pair of shoes that deliberately mismatches either in color, heel height, or squeakiness. The goal is not to confuse, but to humble. A reminder that perfection, especially in footwear, is the root of vanity, and vanity is the root of both unneighborliness and unnecessarily loud church entrances. You look down at your own feet. Your left shoe is brown and leather. Your right, a faded blue with a buckle that jingles when you walk. Your aunt compliments the whimsical asymmetry. You feel both awkward and proud. The village square transforms into a parade of delightful errors. Cobblers stand proudly beside their intentional mismatches, nodding approvingly at the chaos they've curated. One elderly man has fashioned a sandal from woven corn husks. Another has glued bells to only the right shoe. No one laughs cruelly. That would violate the law of gentle observance, which stipulates that mockery must always be whispered, never pointed, and preferably accompanied by a baked good. Afternoon brings heat, and with it, the enforcement of a law that even the birds seem to obey. The rule of midday shade. This regulation, older than most roofs, and almost certainly inspired by someone who once fainted into a well, mandates that between the hours of 1 and 3, all humans, dogs, cats, chickens, and even decorative statues, must retreat into the shade. Sunlight during this window is treated like a polite enemy, acknowledged from a distance, but never engaged directly. Children who forget are gently herded indoors by grandmothers armed with fans and stern eyebrows. You find a spot beneath the jacaranda tree, its lavender blossoms already carpeting the ground in sleepy protest against gravity. You sit beside your cousin, who shares a slice of guava paste and says, "I once got fined for walking during the hot hour." He doesn't sound upset, more like a man reminiscing about a youthful rebellion that involved not fire or crime, but a slightly overconfident stride beneath the noon sun. After the sun dips and the air cools, you help your mother prepare for the law of permitted gossip. This law, passed during a particularly tense period in town history when rumor nearly collapsed an entire wedding season, was designed to contain and redirect gossip into safe hours and designated corners. The goal was to protect reputations while still allowing the townspeople to indulge in their favorite pastime, discussing each other with flair and selective memory. From 6 to 8 p.m., gossip is legal only if it concerns someone not present, it includes at least one compliment, and it is spoken while shelling beans, braiding hair, or weaving straw mats. You choose bean shelling. Your fingers work clumsily at first, but your ears are sharper than ever. You learn that Doña Lydia has been hiding a pet duck in her courtyard, and that the blacksmith's daughter was seen buying cinnamon 3 days before her birthday, which can only mean a secret cake is brewing. You contribute your own tidbit, that the butcher's apprentice sings to the sausages when no one's watching. This earns you a giggle and a nod. Well done. As night settles over the village, the final lore of the day arrives, not with fanfare, but with a soft rustling of leaves and the distant toll of a low-toned bell. It is the rule of blanket distribution, a gentle law, really, passed in the early 1700s by a local friar known only as Brother Cosme, who believed that no one should go to sleep without at least 2 blankets, one for warmth, the other for dreams. He argued, in a treatise that is now mostly used as a doorstop, that the second blanket provided no physical heat, but acted as a psychological quilt for the restless heart. The town, enamored with the sentiment, adopted it at once. You retrieve your 2 blankets from the chest at the foot of your bed. One is wool, the other a patchwork of fabrics from old clothes. It still smells faintly of cedar and oregano. You wrap yourself in both, feeling their combined weight like a legal hug. Your parents pass by the doorway, pause and whisper goodnight, careful not to speak louder than the stars, which are just beginning to appear above the tiled roofs. And as you lie there, blinking slowly, you realize that none of these laws, however strange, ever made you feel trapped. In fact, they've made you feel seen, as though someone long ago looked at life's odd little moments and decided they were worth preserving. Not for control, but for comfort. And with that, your eyes close, not because the day has ended, but because the last law of all, the unwritten rule of rest, has finally been satisfied. You wake with the faint scent of maize porridge drifting through the woven walls of your room, the morning air still clinging to the coolness of dawn, though already the breeze carries with it the low, steady rhythm of village life beginning anew. Somewhere beyond your wooden shutters, the bell ringer, Doña Brigida, is at it again. 7 slow tolls, followed by 1 sharp ding, marking the start of the legal hour for broom sweeping. Yes, even sweeping has its assigned window, because the law of civic dustfulness, enacted in 1682, insists that dust displaced in the morning must be given time to settle before bread sales begin. Otherwise, bakers might find themselves accused of selling gritty crusts. You shuffle out of bed and into your woven slippers. Right one first, of course, because the town code says alternating slipper order, daily, helps maintain spiritual equilibrium. Most people ignore this, but your father, a faithful adherent, claims that the one time he forgot, the pig escaped, the rain gutter cracked, and your uncle Francisco got stung by a bee while wearing trousers 2 sizes too tight. Coincidence? The law says no. Downstairs, your mother is arranging herbs on the table, according to the Botanical Clustering Edict, which encourages households to display plants by category: bitter leaves, soothing fronds, emotional root clusters, each labeled on hand-painted tiles. Supposedly, this helps with both healing and harmony. Today, she's swapped the basil into the mood resilience group, since she overheard your cousin sigh too dramatically during breakfast. Laws of classification, she says, are never just about plants. Outside, the streets are beginning to bustle. Though it's a quiet bustle, the kind born of routine, like flour settling in a sack. You step onto the dusty path just as the morning horn sounds for the rule of equidistant neighbors. It's an urban planning relic from colonial surveyors who were obsessed with geometric layouts and thought emotional harmony could be achieved through exactly measured living space. All homes in town are positioned precisely 20 paces from one another. Doors must open outward, not in, to encourage what the law calls forward-facing diplomacy. You once saw someone fined for installing a door that swung inward, and the scribe had to invent a new adjective to describe the offense. Introportivius. You pass the town fountain, where children are gathered under the jurisdiction of the synchronized splashing law. This surprisingly detailed legislation stipulates that water games must occur in musical unison to preserve public serenity. An elder claps a slow beat, clap, clap, pause, and the children, serious as monks, time their splashes accordingly. One kid gets too excited and splashes on the offbeat. A sharp-eyed grandmother hisses, and order is restored. From there, you make your way to the Hall of Registers, not because you have business there, but because today is a day of mandatory witnessing. The law requires all able-bodied citizens over the age of 10 to witness at least one official documentation ritual each month to uphold civic memory and discourage boredom-induced heresy. You find this law oddly comforting. It's like jury duty. If jury duty involved nibbling sunflower seeds while a man in a velvet hat reads names off a scroll. Inside the hall, the air smells like ink and old straw mats. A clerk, round as a barrel and twice as serious, reads names in the slow rhythm of someone being paid per syllable. You listen as he documents the legal confirmation of a betrothal, the ceremonial retirement of a pair of sandals, and the transfer of a chicken named Hortensia from one family to another. Each act is witnessed, stamped, and recorded in the great ledger, whose pages are turned with such delicacy you half expect them to sing. Later, at the midday market, you're reminded of the regulation of soundable produce. This rule, quite musical in spirit, mandates that all fruits and vegetables sold in the central square must make a discernible sound when tapped. Melons must echo, squash must thud. Tomatoes should produce a pleasing squish, but not a splatter. It's a strange custom with serious consequences. Once, a merchant was shamed publicly for selling a mute eggplant. You pause at a fig stall and watch a vendor rap his knuckles against a papaya, like it's a drum. It gives off a hollow beat, and 3 bystanders nod in approval. A tiny woman behind you mutters, "Sounds like Wednesday." You do not ask what she means. The laws of sound, like the laws of dreams, are better left unexamined too closely. Back home, you help prepare for this evening's civic decency supper. A law from 1704, born from a food fight that turned into a theological debate, mandates that once every quarter, all households must host at least 2 non-family members for dinner to reignite the embers of neighborliness. It's less about food and more about seating charts. Your aunt once got into a silent feud for 2 months because she seated a shoemaker next to a leather tanner, an offense akin to making a priest and a poet share a wine goblet. Tonight, your guests are a retired midwife and the lamplighter's apprentice. You barely know them, but the law is clear. You must share at least one personal anecdote, one communal concern, and one neutral observation about the weather. You prepare accordingly. The meal is warm and humble: stewed beans, sweet potato bread, a single roasted yam, placed ceremonially at the center of the table. Conversation flows in carefully legal tones. "I once mistook the bell for the prayer call," says the midwife, and stitched a wound upside down. "Pigeons are nesting in the belfry again," replies the apprentice. "The air smells like dry rope tonight," you say, fulfilling your meteorological obligation. And just like that, the dinner is a success. After your guests leave, you sit by the hearth and reread one of the older rule books. Leather-bound, corner-frayed, written in script so tiny, you wonder if the scribe had mice for hands. Some of the laws are yellowed out, faded into irrelevance. Others still hold firm. One reads, "A blanket warmed is better than a crown worn cold." Another, "If silence grows too loud, sing." You don't always understand these rules, but as you close the book and feel the gentle weight of evening wrap itself around your shoulders, you realize that maybe understanding isn't the point. Maybe these laws, odd and comforting, tedious and tender, aren't there to govern life, but to notice it, to make sure no one goes unseen. You awaken the next morning not to the sounds of roosters or bells, but to the delicate clatter of quills against wood. The scribes are already at it again. Today is a market license renewal day, and that means all vendors from the surrounding hamlets, valleys, and hilltop hovels have converged upon the town square with their baskets, carts, goats, and petitions, ready to grovel, flatter, or argue their way into another 6 months of officially sanctioned selling. According to the law of trade recertification, enacted under Viceroy Melquiades de Guzman in 1723, no merchant may operate continuously for more than 180 days without undergoing ritual paperwork reaffirmation in the eyes of the community and the vegetable god. The last bit, you're pretty sure, was metaphorical, but the old farmers still whisper to their root crops, just in case. You join the slow, undulating line of townsfolk making their way through the plaza, careful not to cross the painted tiles that demarcate waiting zones from processing zones. One woman once stood with just the toe of her sandal over the border, and the entire registration was halted while a ruling was made. It took 2 hours and 3 cups of calming herb tea before the scribes resumed, having officially declared her foot administratively overambitious. As you near the front, you overhear a heated but extremely polite debate between a cheesemonger and a dried fruit seller over the law of scented proximity. Passed in 1691, it states that goods of competing yet overpowering aroma must be separated by no fewer than 9 paces, or else the olfactory harmony of the square shall be compromised. It's serious business. Last spring, an improperly positioned almond cake vendor was accused of inciting what the local news pamphlet called nasal confusion, and stomach unrest. You watch with drowsy curiosity as each merchant receives their stamped parchment scroll and ceremonial sprig of marjoram, proof of their temporary legitimacy. The marjoram, it is said, wards off spoiled intentions, though most folks use it to flavor their soup. Still, the ritual carries a sort of bureaucratic poetry. The way the parchment curls in the humid air, the way the magistrates seal, an overly intricate design of twin llamas and a sheaf of wheat, presses itself deep into the wax. You almost want to open a stall yourself, just to join the dance of red tape. Wandering to the edge of the plaza, you find yourself at the bench, beneath the oldest tree in town, the place reserved for reciters of obsolete laws. This is not an official post, technically, but ever since old Matteo lost his eyesight, he has stationed himself there with a carved gourd of licorice water and recited at random laws that no longer apply. He is essentially a human footnote. Today he's muttering about the Edict of Unwrinkled Headwear, which he claims once required all citizens to iron their headscarves before attending municipal celebrations. A wrinkled bonnet, he intones, leads to wrinkled morality. You nod sagely as if this means something, and he seems pleased. He coughs once, takes a sip, and continues with a law about dog shadows and their influence on shoe integrity. You let it wash over you like warm rain. Back at home, your neighbor is in a panic. Her rooster has crossed into a prohibited shade zone, and she fears it may be taken as a sign of intentional micro-insubordination. You nod with the grim solemnity this situation deserves. Shade laws, passed during a particularly sun-obsessed era in 1746, dictate where and when domestic animals may stand in shadows, lest they contribute to the perceived unevenness of divine light. You once saw a goat trial. It was not short. You calm your neighbor by offering her half a carrot and a listening ear, both of which are legally recognized under the law of shared root vegetables, which defines community conflict resolution practices. It even outlines proper carrot division techniques. Lengthwise, not crosswise, unless under duress. You follow the law to the letter. Later that afternoon, you find yourself escorting your cousin to the town's listening court, a peculiar institution founded on the belief that many infractions arise from unheard souls. Here, instead of being judged, people are simply heard. Literally. They sit before a panel of yawning listeners and speak their frustrations aloud. The listeners nod, sometimes murmur, "Oh dear," and occasionally offer warm bean paste afterward. Your cousin vents about the goat droppings near her doorstep and how the candle tax has increased again. The session ends with a soft gong and the gift of a knitted glove for her emotional hand. No verdict, just a moment of presence. Somehow, it helps. As the sun begins to drop behind the red-tiled roofs, you're drawn to the sound of shuffling. Today is also a parade day, but not one with music or fanfare. It's the silent march of the parchment bearers, a monthly procession in which citizens walk slowly, each holding up a copy of their favorite law. Some carry big scrolls with flowing calligraphy. Others have tiny scraps, worn at the corners, handwritten by grandparents. You carry one too, your cherished clause from the 1679 Edict of Morning Candles, which mandates that no flame shall be lit before the first yawn of the day. You like this law? It's gentle, and it respects the rhythm of waking. The procession moves like molasses, heads bowed, scrolls fluttering in the breeze. No one speaks. The only sounds are the creak of leather sandals and the sigh of pages turning in the wind. One man drops his scroll. A stranger picks it up, bows, and hands it back. A quiet cheer is offered in the form of 3 synchronized blinks. When you return home that evening, your mother is humming a tune, banned under the nocturnal whistling ordinance, which, strangely, also covers humming in certain key signatures. You don't tell her. Some rules are better left vaguely disobeyed. She ladles you a bowl of bean soup and says, "Don't forget, tomorrow is the inspection of spoon handles." You nod. Of course. Spoon handles must be between 7 and 9 centimeters in curvature, according to the 1711 Culinary Ergonomics Act. A deviation may imply intent to slurp violently. And we simply can't have that. You finish your soup, extinguish the candle with a puff, allowed, not a blow, forbidden, and lie in bed, staring at the wood-beamed ceiling, where the light flickers like a firefly with secrets. It occurs to you that all of these rules, strange, redundant, overly specific, aren't really about control. They're about texture, about giving the world corners and creases and patterned grooves to trace with your tired fingers when the days feel too smooth or too sharp. They are blankets, not cages. And so, with the fading warmth of parchment and marjoram in your mind, you turn to your side, pull the blanket to your chin, and let the rules of sleep, unwritten but deeply understood, pull you under once again. The morning begins, as it always seems to, with the gentle creak of a cartwheel, too proud to be oiled, followed by the unmistakable clink of ceramic lids, tapping against one another, in rhythm with the town's slow exhale. You stir beneath your blanket, just in time to hear the soft chime of the bell of domestic provisions. A law-prescribed ritual meant to indicate that the official inventory clerk is making their rounds by royal decree, issued sometime in 1738 but endlessly reinterpreted by committee. Every household is required to submit, once a week, a verbal accounting of all vessels within their kitchen. Pots, jugs, lids, bowls, spoons, but only if they've been used since the last inspection. Unused vessels are invisible in the eyes of the law. Used ones must be sung about. Your turn comes soon enough. You stand at the doorway, rubbing sleep from your eyes with one hand and holding up a cracked, much-loved ladle in the other. You announce, 1 soup ladle, 3 uses, bean stew, rice water, and an incident with fermented plantains. The clerk nods gravely, jots something in a leather-bound ledger, and moves along. The entire exchange takes under 15 seconds, and yet somehow feels eternal, as if time itself must pause briefly whenever fermented plantains are mentioned in public. Today is also the appointed day for the annual review of public sitting areas, as dictated by the law of collective repose. Originally instated to curb standing-related grumbling among elders in 1694, you and your neighbors, armed with chalk, dried flower petals, and an unreasonable enthusiasm for measuring stool angles, make your way to the designated plazas and courtyards, where every bench, stump, and step must be tested for comfort, cleanliness, and spiritual alignment with the prevailing wind. There's a very specific process. First, you must sit in silence for 1 minute. Then you hum a note in the key of C to gauge acoustic resonance. If it echoes, the seat is said to be too proud. Finally, you sprinkle flower petals and see how many land in your lap. Too many indicates selfish posture. You, sitting on a bench beside the bread shop, receive 3 petals, an auspicious sign. A nearby man receives 9 and looks despondent, muttering about last year's incident with the tilted stone seat of mala suerte. Once that's done, you meander toward the riverbank where, by pure coincidence, or perhaps the quiet orchestration of the registry of mildly spiritual matters, a gathering is taking place under the law of reflective waters, an obscure directive requiring that at least once a month, citizens must gaze into still water and contemplate the state of their hair and souls. You find a spot among the willow roots and look down. The water is murky, your reflection wobbly, but you think you look orderly, not joyful, not sorrowful, just acceptably present, which is all the law requires. Someone behind you whispers about the upcoming audit of family heirlooms. You nod without turning around. That's a big one. The law of heritage clauses is one of the longest-standing rules on the books, dating back to 1602, and it insists that every object passed down more than 3 generations must be periodically reassessed for its symbolic burden. It's not about monetary value. It's about whether a teacup or comb or wooden spoon carries too much expectation. If it does, it must be temporarily exiled to the community's hall of soft objects, a space lined with quilts where overloaded items may rest until they feel less emotionally noisy. Some people secretly bring their in-laws' jewelry there. Back home, you dust off a small ceramic dove with one wing chipped. It's been on your shelf since childhood, though no one remembers whose it was. You've never found it burdensome. Still, you hold it gently, close your eyes, and whisper the official heirloom question. Are you too much for me right now? It doesn't reply, which is technically a good sign. Objects only whisper back during solar eclipses, and even then, only if you're wearing ceremonial mittens. Mid-afternoon rolls in with a faint breeze and a surprise announcement. An emergency town meeting has been called to discuss a recent breach in the law of ambulatory modesty. Apparently, someone walked through the square with a cloak that fluttered more than 3.5 inches off the ground, sparking outrage among the town's most committed drapery traditionalists. The law, codified during a windstorm in 1657, was intended to prevent cloak-related tripping incidents, though it evolved into something of a moral yardstick. You sit in the assembly hall next to an elderly woman knitting a scarf labeled legal length, and listen to 4 hours of windy deliberation. Eventually, it's decided that, while fluttering cloaks are not ideal, the accused may perform penance by crafting 10 cloak weights from ethically sourced river stones and distributing them to the elderly. The town sighs with satisfaction. Justice, as always, has been gently served with a side of lace. On your way home, you pass the bulletin wall, where proclamations and reminders are tacked up with antique brass pins. One catches your eye. It's a draft of a proposed amendment to the law of acceptable afternoon beverages. There's a movement to recognize cold-spiced milk as a seasonal alternative to hot chamomile. You smirk. Every year this happens. Every year it fails. The elders say cold milk unsettles the spleen, which is a concern deeply rooted in folk anatomy diagrams that no one dares challenge. As dusk sets in, you attend the nightly reading at the courtyard of mellow disputes, where grievances are aired in the form of lullabies. A local bard appointed by the Department of Minor Harmony sings a gentle ballad about a misplaced boot and the emotional distress it caused its owner. The accused hums along, then offers a velvet ribbon as an apology. Everyone claps softly. Clapping louder than a whisper is prohibited after sunset, unless in cases of spontaneous communal awe, which this is not. At home, your sister is having a mild existential crisis because her herbal poultice expired yesterday, and the law of natural remedies mandates a ceremonial disposal involving song, incense, and a poem addressed to the herbs. You assist, of course, composing a 5-line verse about the journey of mint from cradle to compost. You sing it softly, holding hands. The smell of rosemary drifts through the window, and all seems balanced again. You end the night by brushing your teeth with a mixture approved by the law of acceptable abrasives. Then record your dreams in the registry of unusual slumber, just in case any patterns suggest an impending economic shift. As the law of dreamed markets, oddly enough, once helped predict a wheat shortage. That dream involved ducks in waistcoats. Yours involves a staircase made of bread, so maybe be on alert. Then you roll into bed, nestled beneath the same wool blanket issued to you by the Lord of Seasonal Sleeping Layers, which specifies thread count minimums and acceptable embroidery themes. You chose the mountain goat motif. It brings you peace, and as your breathing slows and the moon shifts its weight in the sky, you wonder, not for the first time, if perhaps all these laws, these rituals, these songs and scrolls and whispered poems were never really meant to govern, but simply to hold everyone upright, like 1,000 tiny ropes in a big shared tent, flapping gently in the colonial wind. The morning unfolds in that peculiar colonial way, where nothing feels urgent, yet everything must happen according to deeply ingrained rhythms, like the recitation of laws you've memorized since you were barely tall enough to reach the shelf where the family jug was kept. Today begins with the gentle clang of 2 spoons tied together by a string, a legal signal under the law of neighborly noises, indicating that your next-door neighbor has brewed an herbal concoction they believe may prevent melancholy. And since melancholia is a condition recognized by the colonial code as spiritually contagious via sighing, you are now legally obliged to drink a small cup, or at the very least, politely sniff it while making a sound of appreciative concern. You accept the steaming tin mug handed over the fence. Its contents a swirl of cinnamon, river mint, and something suspiciously rooty. You take a polite sniff and let out the required noise, a cross between and oh, which satisfies the neighbor, who nods solemnly and returns to chanting softly over her mortar. It is now mid-morning, and the town prepares for one of its most curious civic obligations, the weekly parade of unintentional offenses. This tradition, codified into law, sometime around 1725 by a council, mostly composed of retired bell ringers and amateur poets, allows citizens to submit anonymous accounts of minor slights they committed by accident. These are then reenacted, slowly and without malice, by community volunteers, all in the name of public absolution and group therapy via performance. You're scheduled to play person who forgot to greet the basket weaver's aunt. You shuffle across the town square in exaggerated shame while holding a turnip, which symbolizes delayed recognition. Meanwhile, someone else pantomimes, took last pastry without checking for elders. The audience, many of whom have brought snacks and embroidery hoops, responds with soft murmurs and the occasional flutter of a hand fan, which in this context expresses forgiveness. As you finish your scene and step off stage, a bell rings thrice to mark the opening of the public garment exhibition. This weekly event is overseen by the Office of Cloth and Color, whose strict mandates about acceptable dye combinations are taken with the kind of solemnity normally reserved for declarations of war. You pass through rows of garments pinned to clotheslines, each tagged with its compliance level. You pause at one particularly vibrant shawl, dyed in alternating panels of saffron and fig. It's been flagged with a yellow ribbon, which means borderline. The regulations stipulate that any textile appearing more than 27% joyous may be reviewed for excessive exuberance. Joy, after all, is to be kept subtle and seasonal. Then it's time to head toward the fountain of petty reconciliations, where the town's law mandates that all neighbors must, at least once per month, acknowledge each other's quirks in a gentle, water-based setting. You find your place on the stone ledge and wait your turn, cupping your hands in the fountain's icy trickle, which symbolizes clarity. Your assigned partner this month is Thomas, who once returned your borrowed broom with a chipped handle. As per the law, you must both name the incident in question aloud while touching the water. You say, chipped broom, early spring, and Thomas replies, gravel driveway, unexpected gust. The ritual requires you to splash once toward each other, then wipe your hands on your own sleeves, never theirs. That would suggest unresolved stickiness, a bureaucratic term no one wants associated with their name. After the splashing comes a silent moment of mutual nodding. No words, just the sound of trickling water and a nearby child reciting categories of legally defined bread. Yes, that's real. The law of comestible taxonomy requires all children over the age of 6 to memorize at least 24 categories of bread, each with its own corresponding emotion. Rye with fennel, contemplation, stale wheat, regret, sweet corn, cautious optimism. You spend your afternoon tending to your doorstep garden of law-approved plants. There's a list, publicly posted, of course, of which herbs and shrubs are permitted within municipal view. Basil is on it. So is lavender. But rosemary must be arranged in diagonal lines, and dill must never be taller than a child's waist. You pluck a few errant sprigs, humming the pruning song required when touching communal flora, just in case a member of the Botanical Audit Council is lurking nearby with their measuring rod and clipboard. It's a quiet, warm sort of evening, and you decide to attend the recitation of unused adjectives, a literary event held monthly in accordance with the law of lexical preservation. This odd but beloved law insists that every adjective which has not appeared in a published document for more than a year must be spoken aloud, sung, or whispered into a jar of rainwater to preserve its semantic resonance. Tonight's words include sanguine, winsome, and frond-like. Each is assigned to a reader who stands before the gathering, clears their throat dramatically, and utters the word into the gathering dusk. The audience, if moved, offers a response in the form of rhythmic foot-tapping. You find yourself particularly touched by lusterless. You tap 4 times. Your neighbor brings out a jar of pickled okra, labeled seasonal contrition snack. It's a dish historically linked to the law of digestible penitence, a regulation that once required those who made socially awkward comments at dinner parties to bring sour but well-intentioned foods to the next gathering. Though not enforced strictly anymore, it remains a beloved tradition. You accept a piece. It is, in fact, sour, but undeniably well-intentioned. As the sky darkens, you return home, where your cousin has just finished preparing the table for the hour of legal whispers, a nightly household ritual where the family recites aloud whichever laws were most recently updated or whimsically clarified. Tonight's whisper involves an amendment to the law of candle etiquette, stating that any candle allowed to flicker more than twice in succession must be turned away from the central room or given a calming sentence to read. Your candle flickers 3 times. You whisper. You are steady. You are bright. You are necessary. The flame stills, and just before bed, you consult your copy of the Almanac of Daily Offsets, a law-mandated calendar that pairs each day's cosmic posture with a counterbalancing activity. Today's alignment leans toward moderately misplaced ambition. So your offset is to fold 10 linens with deliberate slowness. You comply, though you only own 5 linens, and so you fold them twice each, while breathing through your nose and visualizing symmetrical pine cones. Your body sinks into the wool mattress, your head finds its place on the embroidered pillow, and outside your window, the designated town owl hoots, once, then twice. The second hoot means that the hour is certified quiet. The law, after all, takes its naps seriously. And so, in a home just legal enough, among the rustling pages of bureaucratic tenderness, you finally close your eyes. By morning, the soft creak of the wooden door announces the start of the hour of mild disputes, a time block established not to resolve pressing issues, no, nothing so dramatic, but to gently acknowledge the smaller grievances of life. Mismatched buttons, overwatered plants, the inexplicable disappearance of communal goose feathers. It is during this hour that you find yourself seated on the woven mat just outside the town ledger hall, sipping diluted elderberry cordial, only half fermented, in strict accordance with the beverage sobriety statute of 1673, which determined that morning refreshment must not exceed 3 giggles worth of potency. Across from you, Donna Pilar sighs loudly, the accepted prelude to a grievance. Her complaint: her neighbor hung a yellow bedsheet on a Wednesday, an infraction of the Color Calendar Act, which states that yellow is a Tuesday hue, to prevent chromatic disorientation among townsfolk prone to metaphorical dreaming. You nod slowly, solemnly, as dictated by the Manual of Reactionary Expressions, Volume 2, subsection nods, paragraph 3. 1 shall not speak when a sigh is pending. As Pilar elaborates, drifting off into unrelated comments about the goose who's been giving her judgmental looks, you marvel, not for the first time, at the careful machinery of legal expectations that cradle every mundane interaction. Each eyebrow raise, each soft ah, each deliberate silence, all part of a choreography designed less for resolution than for ritual. Like dusting a shelf you know will be dusty again by evening, you return home before noon to attend to your wardrobe, an unexpectedly legislated affair in colonial Latin America. The Clothing Act of 1741 specifies not only acceptable textiles and colors, but also occasions when a garment's sentimental value must be declared before wearing. Today, your dusty mauve overcoat requires a whisper of memory before buttoning. You lean forward and say to the sleeve, "This is for the day it rained sideways while the soup was boiling." It's a silly thing, but legally necessary. Later, you head out to participate in one of the more peculiar legal customs, the walk of unowned chickens. The Livestock Liberty Code, developed in response to a poorly managed poultry census in 1712, requires any chicken found without a tagged ankle ring to be paraded through the town square once per week. You join a small crowd, escorting 4 confused hens down the cobbled path. No one claps. Applause is forbidden during unowned parades, lest the animals become too self-assured. At the halfway point, a boy with a lute plays the official accompaniment, a repeating 3-note pattern meant to reflect directionless optimism. You catch the eye of one chicken who seems to nod in time with the music, and you wonder if it's aware of the law or simply enjoys being part of something structured. A woman behind you whispers, "I think that one has an agenda." You nod, quietly. Afterward, you stop at the Office of Minor Permissions to submit a form. You'd like to place a ceramic frog on your window ledge, and while the act is technically permitted, it still requires documented approval, unless the frog holds a leaf, which would classify it as a rain deity and move it under a different legal category. Your frog holds no leaf. You fill out Form 12B, amphibian statuary without purpose, and drop it into the wicker tray beside the custodian, who gives you a small smile and a legally meaningless thumbs up. On your way home, the scent of lime and burning parchment floats from the printmaker's stall. He's preparing the next edition of the Municipal Euphemism Bulletin, a beloved public notice that replaces harsher terms like incompetent or late with phrases such as momentarily unsynchronized and fond of alternatives. The bulletin was established to comply with the Mood Protection Clause of 1756, which mandated all official documents carry a tone of gentle suggestion, lest citizens be startled into abrupt self-awareness. Back at home, your aunt is adjusting the laces on a ceremonial pillow. She's preparing for the Whisper Tribunal, a bi-monthly event where townsfolk submit low-importance complaints about noises heard between dusk and dawn. A misplaced snore, a suspicious rustle, a door that creaked twice before dawn, all eligible under the Nocturnal Quietude Statute. The pillows are to be held during testimony, both to muffle speech and to provide physical comfort. You once saw someone bring a pillow embroidered with the words, My neighbor's owl is emotionally manipulative. It was ruled poetic, but non-actionable. As evening drapes itself lazily across the roofs, you wander to the garden of statutory flowers, where only plants mentioned in legal texts are allowed to grow. There's rosemary for remembrance, of course, and marigolds for minor regrets, but also a row of sleepy-looking nasturtiums whose petals resemble sighs. You run your hand gently along the path of the garden's maze, tracing the curve of the hedges shaped like quotation marks. Punctuation topiary, mandated by the Grammar Landscaping Decree of 1699, which aimed to harmonize nature and rhetoric. You pause beside a sundial, etched with the words, "Too late is merely a suggestion," a relic of the Temporal Flexibility Act, which clarified that scheduled events must begin not precisely at a time, but in the spirit of that time. A wedding might begin at 4:00 or at 4:19, or when the designated flower child sneezes twice and drops a daisy. The law is surprisingly calming. At supper, you choose slowly, respectfully. The table decorum treaty requires that each bite be accompanied by either a soft hum or a brief compliment to the ingredients. You murmur, "Hello, cinnamon, you're doing beautifully today," and take another spoonful. Your aunt replies to her mashed yam with such texture, such confidence. The meal passes like this for some time, with murmurs and minor declarations of admiration, punctuated only by the clink of tin against clay. Before sleep, you must perform the final observance of the day. The alignment of personal items. The object placement law dictates that your shoes must face outward, your nightcap must rest on the right side of the bed, and your thoughts must be arranged with medium optimism, tilted slightly toward yesterday's contentment. You comply with each, pausing last before your thoughts, where you revisit the chicken parade, the pillow tribunal, and the woman with the bedsheet grievance, realizing that in this odd, legal universe of yours, everything has its place. Even if that place comes with footnotes, you nestle into your blanket. It is legally sanctioned to be 3 degrees warmer than the ambient room temperature. You feel it settle against your legs, as if it too is following code. Somewhere, a cat meows once, probably too loud, possibly reportable. But you smile anyway, because even in a world governed by pickled okra statutes and rooster regulations, sleep is still a place where laws are gently folded and tucked beneath the pillow for safekeeping. Morning creeps in slowly, almost cautiously, as if aware that the law of delicate beginnings might still be in effect. An ordinance passed in 1728 that declared sunrise activities must begin with no sudden noises, no stern expressions, and certainly no clattering of pots before the third rooster call. You stir not with urgency, but with compliance, for the ceiling beams above you are marked with faint chalk lines, indicating which direction you must turn first upon waking, as per the residential orientation mandate. Rightward. Always rightward, lest you invite imbalance into the day. You pad toward the kitchen, bare feet grazing terracotta tiles that were glazed in accordance with the Non-Slip Serenity Act. Every 4th tile bears a painted herb, mint, basil, fennel, because legal scholars once argued that toes exposed to illustrated flora reduce one's tendency toward pessimism. You don't argue with that. Especially not before breakfast. Today is Municipal Hat Day, a monthly observance defined by a rotating schedule of hat forms deemed symbolically stabilizing. This month's regulation headwear, the soft conical bonnet with lateral ribbons, ideally in beige or melancholy teal. You retrieve yours from the wall peg, pin it just above your left ear as prescribed, and feel a curious peace descend. It's not that the bonnet brings comfort, it's that someone decided it should, and everyone agreed to pretend. The streets outside are hushed, filled with townsfolk in identical bonnets, moving gently like a procession of sleepy mushrooms. A minor bell tolls from the justice alcove. Not a full courthouse, just a shaded bench where minor offenses are settled by leaning slightly toward each other and agreeing not to escalate. A man is there now, nodding solemnly while his neighbor apologizes for harvesting his carrots during a moon of questionable authority. Or you pass by slowly, eyes averted as custom requires. Your path leads toward the Guild of Utensil Harmonization, a small but vital bureau responsible for ensuring that all spoons, forks, and ladles within the town limits produce compatible auditory notes when dropped. A mismatched clang might not sound like a big deal, but to the colonial ear, trained in the aesthetics of domestic noise, a dissonant spoon could spark unease. The guild's motto, inscribed above the lintel in perfectly spaced Latin, reads Concordia in cutlery, tranquillitas in soul. You step inside the guild and observe the ongoing calibration ritual. A woman taps 3 pewter spoons against a drum made of dried gourd, listening intently. When one spoon sounds slightly too triumphant, she sets it aside with a sigh. That one, she says, belongs in a kitchen where birthdays are celebrated out of sequence. You nod because of course it does. Later, you walk toward the outskirts of town where the tax orchard sways gently in the breeze. This grove, governed by the Agricultural Revenue Act of 1683, allows citizens to pay certain taxes in fruit, so long as the produce is plucked during moments of personal reflection. You stand beneath a guava tree and close your eyes, thinking of all the things you failed to do last week. A guava falls. You pick it up. Tax paid. Next to the orchard, the archive of reasonable regrets awaits. It's not a building per se, but a shaded bench with a wooden ledger chained to its frame. Citizens are encouraged to record regrets that meet 3 criteria: mild in impact, reflective of daily rhythm, and likely to be repeated. You sit and pen today's entry in your best legal script. I should not have rearranged the spoons by whim. You underline whim. It feels both noble and useless. Perfect. By midday, the sun warms the tiles of the square of sanctioned slowness, a wide space where walking quickly is not forbidden, just highly discouraged by posted suggestions written in soothing cursive. Breathe between steps, one says. Another, let your ankles teach you time. You stroll among the shuffle-footed masses, everyone gliding with the rhythm of deliberate boredom, as if movement itself is a form of bureaucratic paperwork to be submitted to gravity. You find a shady spot beneath the tree of unvoiced complaints, which, according to folklore and the folklore record-keeping requirement of 1739, was planted by a woman who once wrote 5 unsent letters about noisy soup. It is said that if you sit beneath its branches and close your eyes, the tree will absorb your dissatisfaction and file it away in its bark, where squirrels nibble the worst bits into forgetfulness. You try it. It seems to work. A minor commotion nearby signals the start of the civic yawning ceremony. At precisely 2 o'clock, on days ending in 407, the people gather to yawn collectively, not out of fatigue, but as a gesture of communal patience. The law allows 3 types of yawns: the nostril flare, the open-mouth sigh, and the subtle neck stretch with shoulder twitch. You choose the second, naturally. It's the most expressive and least prone to misinterpretation. A good yawn, after all, is a legal statement of soft endurance. Following the ceremony, you wander past the Bureau of Acceptable Coin Clinks, where metal testers clatter shillings onto marble slabs to ensure each makes a sound reminiscent of either a sheep bell or a hopeful raindrop. Any clink too jarring is considered a noise violation. You overhear a discussion about a particularly bold coin from the Hill province, too assertive, possibly minted during a festival. Investigations are underway. As the light softens, your final stop is the wall of permissible questions, a long mural with hundreds of inquiries painted in faded ink. These are the only questions considered universally safe for dinner conversation under the Conversational Guardrails Regulation of 1698. You scan the wall and smile. Old favorites like, "What's the most comfortable chair you've known?" And "Do clouds remind you of anything particular?" Sit beside more obscure entries, such as, "Have you ever been mistaken for a bell?" And "How does your left elbow perceive ambition?" Before returning home, you whisper your favorite aloud. Which pocket holds the future? A man nearby hears you, and without missing a beat replies, "The one with lint, naturally." You both nod. It is not profound, but it is allowed. And so you make your way home, bonnet still perched obediently, guava safely delivered, regrets recorded, spoons harmonized, and yawns shared in perfect legislative coordination. Another day, in colonial Latin America, where every law is a lullaby and every rule a soft nudge toward predictability. Tomorrow you will rise again, turn rightward, sip your permitted infusion, and rejoin this strangely soothing system, where life is less about progress and more about compliance with a set of gentle, arbitrary expectations that ask only that you slow down, breathe through your errands, and remember which day you're allowed to hum while sewing. The rooster that crows at dawn in your village, an official sanctioned rooster by appointment of the 1742 Poultry Clarity Ordinance, has a gentle, wavering cry, like someone politely announcing that the day has arrived, but fully understands if you'd rather stay in bed just a little longer. And yet, when you finally sit up, you do so with the determined slowness demanded by the law of rising equilibrium, which outlines in 10 precise clauses how one must transition from horizontal to vertical without disrupting their own breath pattern. You're already in compliance before your feet touch the floor. Today is weighing day, a monthly tradition enforced not out of vanity, but for bureaucratic comfort. The notary of bodily constance, a cheerful man with a beard shaped like a bracket, greets you at the town's balancing pavilion. This pavilion, built under the Equanimous Design Act of 1687, is all symmetry. Arches mirror arches, columns echo columns. Even the creak of the wood planks beneath your feet is regulated to occur no more than once every 2 paces, to avoid unnecessary sonic irregularity. You step onto the official town scale, a marble platform inlaid with copper numerals and a faint scent of sage. And wait while the notary jots your measurement onto a scroll titled Masses of Note. He offers you a boiled fig and a nod of bureaucratic approval. No celebration, no judgment, just recorded neutrality, which in this town is the highest honor. From there, you meander toward the whisper registry. This isn't a place where secrets are kept. Heavens no, but rather where quiet utterances made under one's breath are catalogued, and if deemed pleasantly dull, preserved for posterity. You contribute your daily whisper. I believe the second drawer squeaks more politely. The scribe nearby gasps very softly, then scribbles it down with reverence. You may receive a commendation for tonal modesty. Next, you visit the Bureau of Clocks that seems slightly off. This agency handles timepieces that don't air enough to be broken, but just enough to feel nostalgic. You offer up your kitchen clock, which lately has been arriving 2 minutes late to every hour, as if resisting progress. The clerk cradles it like a baby and murmurs, an elegant reluctance. She logs it under the category horological hesitations, a designation reserved for clocks that yearn. Lunchtime arrives, but as per the digestive pacing agreement of 1711, no one eats until the hour of settled stomachs. This is calculated by observing the angle of shadows beneath elderberry shrubs. When the shadows point exactly halfway between the sundial and the laundry line, a bell rings, not loudly, of course, and the meal may begin. Your plate consists of exactly 5 spoonfuls of lentil medley, crafted under the flavor simplicity decree. A triangle of regulation bread with edges no sharper than a recited poem, and a lukewarm infusion of chamomile and permissible memory. You chew rhythmically, slowly, while staring at the approved contemplation wall. Today it features a mural of baskets being woven by unseen hands. Someone nearby murmurs, "There's comfort in unbothered craftsmanship." And you nod, mid-chew. After the meal, it's time to contribute your civic thought to the sentiment ledger. Everyone writes one feeling they didn't have today. It keeps the collective emotion index balanced. You scribble, "I did not feel urgent." The ledger keeper offers you a paper carnation and places your entry beside, "I did not feel singular, and I did not feel peppery." This is public mood work. It's respected. The remainder of the afternoon is dedicated to small rectifications, a set-aside period where citizens are encouraged to fix mildly broken things that aren't causing real problems. The town philosophy, laid out in the Book of Middling Men's, suggests that correcting tiny flaws keeps larger chaos at bay. You rethread 2 buttons onto a jacket you never wear, wipe dust off a shelf bracket, and rearrange your teaspoons from smallest to largest, then from shiniest to dullest, just to explore the legislative space between symmetry and whim. Your final errand of the day takes you past the sighing gate, the official egress for those burdened by minor disappointments. It is customary, when exiting through this archway, to release a well-regulated sigh, a soft, shoulder-shaking exhale, calibrated to indicate gentle resignation, but not despair. You do so. The gate responds by emitting its own echoing sigh from a hidden pipe system beneath the cobbles. You feel understood. Outside the town center, you wander into the field of slightly purposeful stones. These rocks, arranged according to the Non-Accidental Geography Act of 1759, form low, meandering paths that lead nowhere in particular, but do so with intention. You follow one curve for several minutes, then another. A fellow wanderer passes you going the opposite direction and whispers, "I believe this path improves when reversed." You smile, because you've heard that before. As the sky darkens, the law of declining volume begins to take effect. Citizens speak in half phrases. Market criers hum instead of shout. Children are required to replace laughter with muffled giggles behind handkerchiefs. Even the fountain in the central square, regulated by aqueduct pressure controls, splashes more demurely after twilight. You return home beneath lanterns that glow a regulated amber, their brightness capped by the luminance restraint edict. You undress beneath a blanket of silence, pull on a sleep shirt bearing the seal of acceptable bedwear, and brush your teeth for exactly the 3 minutes prescribed by the Uniform Hygiene Duration Statute. Not because your teeth demand it, but because time, when structured gently, feels less like erosion and more like companionship. Before bed, you fill out your day's end assessment slip. Did you speak in soft tones? Yes. Did you resist finishing anything too quickly? Yes. Did your footsteps match the tempo of moderate thought? You pause, then write. Mostly, that's good enough. And finally, as your head meets the linen pillow, fluffed to legally sanctioned density, you let out one last breath. Soft, precise, and half a second longer than usual. A closing act in the quiet opera of regulated calm. Tomorrow, you will sigh again, chew rhythmically, calibrate your teaspoons, and log all the things you didn't feel. And that, somehow, will be everything. Morning seeps in through the narrow wooden shutters, filtered, as always, by the cloth of acceptable illumination. A loosely woven muslin, mandated by the Drapery Code of 1743, to soften daylight, so it doesn't startle anyone too vigorously into consciousness. The sun, cooperative and regulated, does not burst in. Rather, it leans politely, warming the room with the same respectful cadence required of all village activities. You sit up slowly, not out of laziness, but in full compliance with the awakening gracefulness mandate, which encourages 3 distinct stretches before one's feet touch the floor. One for the arms, one for the back, and one, simply, for intention. Your slippers, positioned exactly 3 inches from the bed frame by last night's bedtime checklist, greet your feet with a neutrality that borders on companionship. No squeaks, no heel slippage. The ordinance of quiet footwear, last revised in 1692, sees to that. You begin your day with a ceremonial shuffle to the humble reflection nook, a small alcove every home is required to maintain, containing one modest mirror, one bowl of room temperature water, and a linen square embroidered with an uplifting but non-intrusive saying. Yours reads, "Even dust settles." You dab your face with the linen, not to clean yourself, cleanliness is incidental, but to acknowledge the start of motion, a principle highly prized in this age of regulated slowness. Breakfast today is cereal of legal mildness, a mix of grains that offers no flavor-based surprises, served in a ceramic bowl so plain it was once mistaken for a floor tile. The spoon angle act requires that you bring each bite to your mouth at a 45-degree tilt, not because it tastes better that way, but because it creates a pleasing visual rhythm should anyone be quietly observing from across the table, as they often are. Outside, the neighbors gather for mid-morning fence consensus, a semi-weekly ritual where property boundaries are not redrawn, but reaffirmed. One points to a hedgerow and says, "That is yours." And the other replies, "It seems so," followed by a synchronized nod. Disputes are rare, not because people never disagree, but because the dispute softening statute of 1704 requires that all disagreements be first translated into questions about vegetables. Would you say this is more of a beet issue or a squash one? Tends to lower blood pressure. You stroll into town via the path of incremental delight, a cobbled road laid out with a slight, almost imperceptible curve, designed so that one never feels like they're walking directly toward anything. On the way, you pass the statue of Don Alonso de la Paz Cordial, the founding father of bureaucratic friendliness, who once delayed an entire rebellion by offering rebels tea and gently corrected their grammar. His stone face bears a faint smile, like someone who's just remembered a library fine but doesn't mind. At the plaza, you attend the lawful silence reading hour. Citizens gather on the steps of the Hall of Neutral Voices to read aloud from books written in the 17th century that have been pre-approved for their sentence length, paragraph symmetry, and narrative non-urgency. Today's selection is Manual of Acceptable Shadows, a treatise on how to categorize household dimness. One passage makes you yawn without realizing. This is considered a high compliment. After the reading, you file a yawn slip with the civic drowsiness clerk, who logs your name beside a small ink stamp shaped like a reclining goose. The goose symbolizes modest restfulness without sloth, a very specific ideal often referenced in colonial Latin American art, though rarely noticed unless one squints at the margins of tapestry borders. Your midday walk takes you through the market, where the Noise Modulation Act ensures that every vendor calls out only in monotone. "Chickpeas," one mutters. "Dry cloth," another says flatly. Even the children selling wooden spoons do so with an affectless chant. "Spoon, spoon, spoon." It's all very reassuring, like being inside the dream of a particularly rule-abiding monk. You approach the registry of forgotten tasks, where today's community errand is remembering to unknot the communal hammock. A clerk, dressed in the brown and beige uniform of quiet productivity, hands you a feather quill and a form labeled "Task Acknowledged." You sign without hesitation. You've never even seen the communal hammock, but acknowledging it feels right. Later, you stop at the Museum of Mundane Measures. Inside, long shelves are dedicated to exhibits such as average ladder width, 1758-1781, and samples of permissible humidity. There's a very popular display this week featuring the 1723 legal yawn duration timer, a brass and leather contraption that once measured involuntary expressions of fatigue to ensure they did not exceed 8 seconds. A gentleman named Raphael once reached 12. He was awarded a week of porch duty and a commemorative bench plaque. You pause beside the Hall of Collective Shrugs, a wide atrium with padded benches arranged for group non-committal thinking. Visitors are encouraged to sit, stare at the wall, and occasionally shrug in response to thoughts like, should we rearrange the post office shelves? Or is this orange more of a yellow? One man whispers, maybe, and a woman replies, I suppose. The rest of you feel gently satisfied. Returning home, you pass the weekly parade of medium expectations. A slow procession winds through the plaza, featuring banners that say things like, doing fine, and could be worse. There are no marching bands, just a flutist playing a melody that seems permanently stuck between the first and second note. A man in a powdered wig tosses flower petals into the air, but only 5 at a time, lest someone feel overwhelmed. Back in your home, you settle into the legal napping alcove, a windowless corner padded with straw, linen, and affirmations like, sleep is useful, stitched into the walls. Before lying down, you light a single lavender stick, approved by the Council of Moderately Scented Items. The smoke drifts not upward, but sideways, curling like a bureaucratic signature on a parchment of forgettable poetry. Your nap, of course, is not for rest. It is a contribution to the National Energy Averaging Project, which balances wakefulness across the colony. You dream of sorting dry beans by the sound they make when dropped from modest heights. When you wake, the sun is already slanting and bells are ringing the melody of nearness to evening. A 5-note chime tuned to the frequency of linen drying in the breeze. You open your journal and record your legal dream summary. I neither rose nor fell. I remained. That's enough. And so, your day, nestled deep within this slow-moving, parchment-scented universe of colonial Latin America, continues along its way. Not toward excitement, but toward a soft and regulated stillness, wrapped gently in scrolls, sealed with wax, and stored in the cupboard of collective sighs. You step outside just in time to catch the final rays of what the Almanac of Calibrated Sunsets calls a moderate golden diminishment, the kind of dusk that neither inspires poetry nor excuses procrastination. The sky has been required, by colonial edict no less, to refrain from too much pink or any dramatic cloud flourishes, since excessiveness in the firmament was once linked to public daydreaming, which in turn led to a decline in document completion rates. So now the evening sky just sort of fades, like a polite nod from the heavens. Your destination this evening is the Council of Domestic Temperance, where residents meet to discuss how little they have changed their furniture, adjusted their opinions, or rephrased their greetings. There's something deeply calming about standing in a circle of neighbors, each one swearing that their opinion on stew thickness has remained within the same 5-degree margin since the last fiscal equinox. The chairperson, Don Tomas de las Equivalencias, clears his throat and declares proudly, "Our sofa has not moved since 1711. Applause is forbidden, but several approving eyebrow raises ripple through the crowd. Before returning home, you take a detour to the Alley of Slight Curiosities, a cul-de-sac where old laws are left to slowly fade, posted on yellowing parchment and protected by thin veils of spider silk. One scroll reads, Law of Acceptable Chirping. Birds must tweet at intervals no shorter than 6 seconds. Another declares, No street may be named after an emotion stronger than mild contentment. You nod at these forgotten regulations, comforted that someone once cared enough to legislate bird volume. Passing the notary's office, you hear the low creak of the ink verification lever being tested for tension. Inside, a clerk ensures that all quills remain below the maximum permissible fray density. You remember the famous quill incident of 1694, when an overly bushy feather caused two clerks to copy the same letter twice. The duplication led to a surplus of grain that no one noticed for 5 years. And now, every feather is inspected as carefully as an infant's first tooth. At home again, you slip into your twilight slippers, slightly heavier than your morning pair, as decreed by the Evening Soul Stability Act. They produce just enough floor sound to confirm your existence without alarming any rodents or ghosts. The domestic owl, licensed, trained, and deeply unimpressed, blinks once from his corner perch, which you salute briefly with a customary bow. No one really remembers when owls became mandatory in homes, but now they're as common as soup and just as emotionally detached. Tonight's supper is regulated lentil mash, which you prepare using your standard colonial stirring rhythm. You pause every third circle, per the uniform culinary tempo accord, lest you enter a trance and forget your own name. You recall how your great-aunt, Louisa, once stirred straight through supper and had to be gently reminded that she had a body. The lentils, as expected, yield no surprises. An edible poem of bland consistency. After the dishes are stacked, always vertically, never diagonally, for reasons no one questions anymore, you sit at your passive reflection table. You flip open your logbook and record the required sentiments of the day. One mild joy, cat walked evenly. One concern, rain may be wetter than usual. And one philosophical shrug, the broom still sweeps. Your attention shifts to the gentle knock at the window. A traveling notification chaplain, robed in the official garb of soft announcements, linen, light beige, single button, offers you a printed card through the open pane. It reads, "Tomorrow, clouds." You nod solemnly, offer him half a walnut, and return to your interior world. A candle is lit, standard wick length, measured to ensure exactly 82 minutes of illumination, and you sit cross-legged on the floor mat of regulated comfort. You place your hand on the wooden figurine of just enough hope, a carved artifact common in colonial Latin American households, believed to anchor dreams without propelling ambition. Yours resembles a mule with slightly uneven ears, the symbolic representation of probably doing okay. As you sit in silence, the official hourglass in the hallway tips itself, thanks to the mechanism of unrushed passage, a gear-operated reminder that time should not be chased, but occasionally noticed. It makes a soft shh as the grains fall, like a librarian humming to herself in a room full of dust. You think of the small laws that govern even the nighttime. The law of acceptable pajama texture, the rule of one blanket, one breath, the decree of toothbrushing gaze, which insists that one must never stare directly into the mirror while cleaning molars, lest one's reflection take itself too seriously. Each law strange, each one oddly soothing. A neighbor sings a lullaby from 2 courtyards over, just loud enough to be heard, just soft enough to be legal. The notes waver in the air, approved by the Council of No Startling Changes in Melody. The song isn't beautiful, really, but it carries that faint scent of stability that makes your spine loosen and your thoughts drift toward slipperier terrain. You crawl into bed, which is technically a certified repose alcove, its height pre-measured to discourage sudden standing. The sheets are neither crisp nor soft, just gently tired. The mattress sighs beneath you, exhaling as if it, too, has had just enough today. Your final act is to whisper your day's phrase, a nightly custom in all compliant homes. Tonight, your phrase is, "The window is closed, but the wind is on time." It means nothing, or perhaps everything. And just like that, the ceiling begins to blur into the dark, and the candle's last flicker nods its farewell. Another day, exactly as it should be, has passed through your bones and out the soles of your feet, leaving no ripple. You barely stir the next morning, not because you're particularly tired, but because according to the sleep continuity ordinance passed quietly in 1732, all inhabitants must attempt at least 5 additional minutes of semi-conscious reflection before emerging from bed, just long enough to remember who they are, where their elbows go, and whether the ceiling above them has been inspected for excessive enthusiasm. The sunlight trickling in is precisely diffused through your regulation linen curtains, designed to filter only 67% of direct rays, ensuring that your awakening is neither too sudden nor too dramatic. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster complies with the law of measured crows, producing exactly 2.5 caws at intervals of no less than 30 seconds. You sit up slowly, placing each foot onto your mat of introspective awakening, a small square of woven straw, certified to encourage gentle thoughts, but discourage ambitious daydreams. You stretch, not fully, just enough to comply with the Morning Motion Act, which states all stretches must be symmetrical, horizontal, and soundless. The air smells faintly of warm parchment, drying clay, and the curious scent of slightly overcooked optimism. It's a good morning. By colonial standards, breakfast consists of bread of known ingredients, a dense loaf containing nothing that surprises the tongue, and a shallow cup of barely warm barley infusion. The mug bears the official stamp of acceptable beverages, an imprint in the shape of a moderately amused donkey, indicating that it neither invigorates nor depresses. While chewing with even pace, you skim the community scroll, a daily bulletin handwritten by one of the more responsible monks in town, summarizing updates like pigeon census complete and law against rapidly blinking near children reaffirmed unanimously. Today's duties include confirming that your garden's stones remain in their assigned emotional alignment, a peculiar law from 1614 requiring citizens to rotate their yard rocks by 15 degrees every quarter moon to prevent spontaneous metaphysical imbalance. The rocks themselves appear indifferent to your efforts, though one of them hums softly when you pass, a sure sign that the garden inspector will be pleased. You return indoors to polish your ceiling observation spoon, a long-handled convex utensil used to reflect light onto your ceiling in patterns that suggest thoughtfulness but not distraction. This practice, oddly enough, emerged from a 17th century attempt to reduce indoor arguments, as staring upward at spoon glimmers supposedly reminded quarrelers of the fleeting nature of clouds. And also because it's hard to yell with your mouth open in awe. The hour of community stillness arrives just before noon. All citizens are required to cease motion for the duration of one deep breath and 3 murmured acknowledgments of existence. You stand still by the doorway, palms lightly pressed together, thinking about the number of times you've done this, the number of times your ancestors did it before you, and how many others, right now, are probably muttering the same gently whispered phrase. It is noon. So it is. At midday, you receive a small scroll from the courier hawk, a bird trained to obey the postal gliding statute, which forbids wing flapping within city limits to preserve auditory tranquility. The message is a circular notification reminding you to inspect your hat brim for legal compliance. Too wide, and it risks obscuring your profile. Too narrow, and it fails to convey civic humility. Your current brim is 3.8 centimeters. A solid choice, neither brash nor bashful. The afternoon sun warms the stone steps where you sometimes sit, and you trace a finger around the pattern of predictable loops carved into the stone. These loops are everywhere in colonial public spaces, a kind of psychological anchor installed by city planners who feared disorder more than plague. The loops ensure wandering thoughts return to their origin eventually. You lose track of time tracing them. Evening approaches, and the mandatory civic lantern glows to life outside your window. Its flame is regulated by wick type, oil scent, and flame wiggle velocity, all carefully outlined in the quiet illumination charter. The glow is steady, orange, a little sleepy. You mirror it with your own lantern inside and begin your evening recitations, listing everything you did not forget to do today. As forgetting is, oddly enough, less concerning to the authorities than excessive memory retention. You sit again on the passive reflection table's padded stool, where your great-uncle once had a vision of a perfectly average apple. You open your commemorative dull moments log and gently record today's highlight. Churned butter, no unexpected textures. Beneath it, you sketch a drawing of your neighbor's fence, a marvel of compliance, with each slat precisely 5.5 fingers wide. You add shading, then erase it. Shading flirts with excitement. Finally, it is time for rest. The ritual of bedtime tidying takes no more than 5 minutes, smoothing the sheets with even-numbered hand motions, tapping the headboard 3 times, once for each queen who never visited, and tucking in the corners without enthusiasm. You blow out the candle with a regulated sigh, one that dissipates worry, but retains just enough awareness to remember where you placed your knees. The owl hoots once, the floorboard sighs beneath you, and the walls, painted in the official color of slight regret, seem to pull just a little closer. Everything is where it should be, and more importantly, nothing is where it shouldn't. Your last thought is a quiet one, drifting like a regulation kite on a windless afternoon. You existed. You complied. You remembered to blink evenly before sleep. And now, as your breath settles into a slower rhythm, and your limbs grow heavy with the kind of exhaustion that only bureaucracy can bring. You begin to slip gently beneath the weightless comfort of repetition, knowing that each law, each soft decree of a world determined to maintain order without urgency, has wrapped itself around your day, like a blanket made of rules and small kindnesses. The candle has long gone out, but its presence lingers in the faint smell of wax, and your thoughts blur at the edges, like ink spreading on slightly damp parchment. Soft, slow, inevitable. You think of stones warming in the sun, spoons catching daylight, pigeons counted one by one, until all that's left is the certainty that none of them flew away. You think of community stillness, of neighbors whispering nothing important at the same time, and the comforting knowledge that tomorrow will bring no surprises. No war, no scandal, no parade. Just another mild day that begins with half toast and ends with a foot bath, lukewarm enough to earn its municipal ribbon for temperance. Your breath is the metronome now. The night hums like a lantern wick. And even your dreams, should they choose to visit, will obey the guideline of narrative simplicity. No flying, no falling, no talking fish. Just old familiar streets, remembered turns, and the low hush of wind moving past shutters, sealed exactly right. So rest easy, regulation sleeper, wrapped in a life measured not by greatness, but by gentle consistency.